Hi guys, welcome to our dive into the rise and fall of the Vikings. A 4-hour saga packed with longships, fearless explorers, and dramatic battles that reshaped medieval Europe. Stick around as we uncover how cutting-edge shipbuilding launched raiders from Scandinavia to the shores of England, France, and even North America, and how the same seafaring genius forged powerful kingdoms before an icy climate shift and new faiths changed everything. If you love history told with cinematic flair, smash that like button, hit subscribe, and ring the bell. Comment below telling us what time it is in your country right now. Before you ever set foot on a Viking longship skimming across the North Atlantic, you first have to slip back in time to the quiet shores of Lake Mälaren in what is now Sweden. Picture yourself standing there in the late 6th century, the air thick with pine resin and wood smoke. You watch a group of craftsmen splitting oak planks with iron wedges, fitting them edge to edge, and fastening them with rows of hand-forged rivets. The hull they're shaping isn't just a boat. It's a floating throne. You can already sense that the community gathering around this vessel isn't here for a fishing trip. They're preparing a ceremony that will fire the opening shot of an age we now call Viking, even though the word hasn't yet been spoken. You kneel beside the shoreline and run your fingers over a finished section of the hull. The planks overlap like dragon scales, light yet strong, designed to flex with every wave. By building this way, what archaeologists call the clinker technique, these people unlock the secret to speed, maneuverability, and open sea confidence centuries ahead of most of Europe. You realize that the technology taking shape under your hands will become the backbone of raiding voyages, trade missions, and epic migrations. But right now, the boat's first journey is a far more spiritual one. As night falls, torches flare, and you're drawn into the heart of a funeral. The body of an elder, perhaps a war leader, perhaps a woman whose lineage anchors the clan, lies on a raised wooden bed inside the hull. Around her glimmer finely wrought iron swords, silver-clasped belts, glass beads from the continent, and textiles dyed the color of ripened cranberries. You see a gaming board set for one final match and a falcon hooded for a silent hunt in the afterlife. No object is accidental. Each piece telegraphs rank, connections, and the promise that power extends beyond the grave. You can't help sizing up the onlookers. Tall youths grip spears, their faces painted with narrow blue lines that echo the ripples of the lake. Older warriors in crested iron helmets stand farther back, measuring one another with the cool detachment of men who know that tonight's theater decides tomorrow's hierarchy. Even the children seem to understand that they're witnessing something more than a burial. They're watching the charter myth of their community unfold in real time. By casting their leader onto the waters in a ship laden with treasures, they're broadcasting a message no neighboring tribe can miss. We dominate the shoreline, we command the waterways, and we're wealthy enough to bury fortune itself. You turn your gaze to the prow, carved into the stylized head of a serpent. Its wooden jaws gape over the water as though ready to strike. In years to come, that serpent motif will race far beyond this lake, etched into metalwork found in Anglo-Saxon monasteries, painted on shields glimpsed by terrified monks on Lindisfarne, and eventually stitched into tapestries commemorating Norman dukes, who themselves descend from Scandinavian stock. Right now, though, the serpent guards a liminal threshold. When attendants slide the boat out over greased logs, you feel the ground tremble. With every heave, timbers groan, and the crowd chants words you can't quite catch. Fragments of poetry, maybe, calling on ancestors or praising gods who travel between the worlds. Once afloat, the vessel drifts a little way offshore. Archers tow the water's edge, flaming arrows held high. you suddenly understand that the ship is both coffin and pyre. At a shouted cue, the arrows streak outward, hitting the sail and the stacked brushwood along the gunwales. Flames bloom, licking the night sky orange. Sparks scatter across the lake like a meteor shower, and smoke billows upward, carrying with it the scent of tar, pine, and scorched wool. The smell of transformation. Standing there, you grasp how profoundly boats saturate the imagination of these people. A house, a chariot, and a temple could all be separate structures in another culture. Here, the ship is all thretor. It moves you over water, shelters you in war, and ushers you into eternity. Because of that multivalent power, ship ownership isn't merely practical, it's political theater. When you hear later that no fewer than 15 such burials line the ridge at Valsgarda, each progressively larger and richer than the last, you understand you're looking at a dynasty that stakes its claim to authority on mastery of woodworking, river traffic, and ritual display. Yet the ceremony's extravagance hints at something else. Long-distance exchange networks already humming across northern Europe centuries before the Viking raids make headlines in medieval chronicles. You saw Frankish glass shimmering by the corpse, Baltic amber tucked beside sword hilts, and Arab silver coins sewn into garments as talismans. That means the clan burying its dead here trades far beyond its valley, tapping routes that arc down the Russian rivers to the Caspian, westward to Saxon markets, and south along continental riverways. You start to realize that the famous mobility of Vikings has deeper roots. The waterways you will later watch fill with sleek raiding fleets have been commercial highways since your boat-building hosts first learned to yoke elm and iron. The more you absorb, the clearer it becomes that political consolidation is happening right beneath your feet. Chieftains who command labor to fell forests, quarry stones for grave markers, and commission ornate weapons hold sway not just through brute force, but through spectacle. Every burial you witness is a public investment, an advertisement for stability. Follow me, the ritual seems to say, and your descendants will reap wealth potent enough to blaze at your funeral ship's prow. In a world where shifting alliances define safety, that promise carries real weight. You suspect that when smaller families on adjacent inlets see the glow over Lake Mälaren, they'll send emissaries bearing tribute rather than risk being labeled outsiders. Still, even as you admire the spectacle, you note a tension buzzing in the cold air. Risk. Sinking so many resources into a dead leader tests the living. If another clan strikes now, warriors defending the funeral can be overrun. That gamble tells you the mourners feel confident or desperate to project invulnerability. Either way, the choice sparks an arms race of pageantry that will later echo in the dragon-headed longships thundering up the Seine and the Thames. In other words, the swagger you'll soon associate with Viking raiders is incubating in these funerary competitions, where prestige is measured in tonnage of timber and ounces of imported silver. To make sense of the emotions tugging at you, wonder, unease, admiration, you remind yourself that this is also a religious act. You recall sagas written long after these people vanish, in which great heroes traverse a cosmic ocean toward Valhalla. Perhaps this flaming ship sketches the earliest lines of that myth, a prototype for the Hall of the Slain. Viewing it through your own 21st century lens, you might call it myth-making or brand-building. But to the mourners, it's covenant. Living hands must carry the dead safely across the liminal water so the living heart of the tribe can survive calamity, famine, or invasion. By dawn, only a charred keel floats where the richest ship once lay. You scoop a cooled rivet from the shallows. Its surface shimmers with iridescent film, colors born in heat and sacrifice. Close your fist around that artifact, and you hold the condensed story of a people on the edge of explosive change. Within a century or two, their descendants will perfect the boat-building skills you witnessed, pair them with daring leadership, and map coastlines from Baghdad to Newfoundland. But none of that swashbuckling future makes sense unless you first feel the sting of campfire smoke in your eyes on this tranquil Swedish lake. So, as you settle back into your seat to watch the rest of our video, keep that rivet in mind. Every scene we'll cover, from monastery raids to transatlantic settlements, derives its momentum from the spiritual, technological, and political forces you just experienced. You now understand that ships weren't mere tools. They were the beating heart of an identity powerful enough to outlast its own age. By beginning our journey here, you've anchored yourself in the quiet cradle of a storm that will roar across continents. Stick with us, and you'll see how a single blazing funeral boat can light the path for an empire of sails. You rise with dawn's gray light still filtering through the pines, drawn back to the shoreline that smelled of wood smoke just hours ago. The funeral boat has burned to a black silhouette, yet 20 paces inland, a fresh keel lies cradled on oak blocks. Craftsmen are already at work, axes ringing like bells in morning air. You step closer and realize the entire village has shifted from mourning to making, channeling grief into lumber. Even the children who sifted ash last night now gather sap, preparing pine tar that will waterproof the newborn hull. Watch how the master builder studies each oak trunk before the first strike. He isn't sawing boards across the grain, wasting strength in sawdust. Instead, he drives iron wedges along natural fibers, splitting planks so the grain runs true from stem to stern. These rived boards bend without splintering, giving the future hull the spring of a U-bow. When he fastens them edge to edge, overlapping like fish scales, he clinches wrought iron rivets so the metal mushrooms tight against iron washers. You feel the hull's heartbeat with every hammer blow. The internal frame grows next, ribs shaped from naturally curved roots, lashed to the keel with pliant spruce roots soaked in seawater overnight. No right angles exist here. Every curve whispers efficiency. You run your palm along the sweep of the bilge and notice how shallow the draft will be. Such geometry lets a finished ship glide over sandbars, subtani tidal rivers, and slide onto any beach belly down. You picture yourself leaping overboard in knee-deep surf, dragging the prow past the tide line while monastery bells begin their panicked clang. Near midday, the sailmaker arrives, unrolling bolts of densely woven wool still pungent with lanolin. Under a rawhide-laced frame, apprentices test for even tension, then brush the fabric with red ochre soaked in fish oil. The pigment protects against rot and bleeds intimidation into the horizon. A single square sail, braced on a yard that can swing across the mast, turns the ship from muscular galley into wind-powered missile. With a following breeze, the crew can ship oars and cover 200 miles in a long summer day. You watch carpenters carve a steering board that will hang on starboard, the side that soon becomes synonymous with direction itself. Its asymmetrical blade lets the helmsman stand high, reading watercolor for hidden shoals, yet it lifts free in an instant when the keel noses toward shore. No vulnerable sternpost rudder, no high dock required. Just a quick heave, and the ship rests safely on gravel. Imagine coastal defenders planning stone breakwaters, only to discover attackers who can simply haul their vessel across the beach and strike from the landward side. Decoration follows function without ever surrendering to vanity. A slender dragonhead takes form at the prow, its jaw open wide enough to slice oncoming spray. Beneath fresh paint, the ornament is pegged, not fixed, so you can unship it when approaching Christian ports that ban pagan symbols. Shields will hang along the gunnels, bright discs doubling as armor and freeboard. Even the ship's vivid striping hides practical chemistry. Iron oxide pigments deter marine borers while proclaiming wealth to every shoreline. Stand back and connect lineage. This hull echoes the burned funeral craft, yet surpasses it in every dimension. Archaeologists, centuries from now, will nickname such vessels after treasures like the Oseberg and Gokstad finds. But you sense the genealogy firsthand. Broader beam here for cargo, finer lines there for speed. Either model can outrun most European escorts. Paired with the new square sail, the design unlocks latitudes no road vessel dared attempt. First across the North Sea to Lindisfarne, then down the Seine to Paris, and eventually westward to lands whose names remain unwritten. As twilight stretches long shadows across the yard, the master builder pauses and hands you a shaving of fragrant oak. He taps the unfinished keel and explains, through gestures more than words, that every piece of timber stands in for a vow. To fell a tree wrongly invites rot. To clinch a rivet poorly invites drowning. Skill isn't just workmanship here, it is theology. You recall last night's pyre and recognize a continuum. The society that burns a ship for the dead must build a better one for the living, or surrender both honor and horizon. When torches finally flare, you smell fresh pine tar heating in iron cauldrons. Apprentices brush the viscous brew into every seam until the planks gleam dark as midnight water. Tar seals against leaks, but the builder winks at you and mentions another virtue. It masks human scent from watchdogs along Baltic farms. Even chemistry becomes strategy, a subtle edge on future battlefields. Before sleep fully claims you, a gust ripples across the lake and snaps an unfurled test cloth. You catch the smell of rain and see crewmen angle the yard to spill wind, rehearsing maneuvers by torchlight. Their silhouettes move like parts of a single organism. Rowers, helmsmen, sail trimmers, every motion calibrated to the hull's living pulse. In that choreography, you glimpse the future navy of a restless people. A floating republic where rhythm, not rank, decides survival across the wide, cold sea. You leave the slipway under a canopy of stars mirrored in the black lake, a splinter of oak still warm in your pocket. Last night's rivet sang of endings. This sliver hums beginnings. Together, they form a compass aimed outward, toward coasts not yet penciled on any monk's map. You fall asleep to the rhythm of distant axes, a heartbeat of innovation that will soon echo in surf under a crimson sail. When you wake again, the hull may already taste water, and you'll feel the prow surge forward, hungry for horizons no funeral fire can contain. You wake to rhythmic chanting that threads through pre-dawn mist like the warp of a loom. Yesterday, you watched craftsmen clinch the last iron rivet. Today, you join the same hands as they heave the new hull toward water. Every able body, elders leaning on ash staves, toddlers clapping soot-black palms, has converged on the slipway. When the prow finally kisses the lake, a collective shout rolls across the surface as if the shoreline itself is exhaling. In this moment, you sense that the vessel is no longer mere wood and wool. It has become the spine that binds an entire community to one pulse. Step aboard and feel cedar tar resin catch under your boots. Benches line the gunnels in neat cadence, each paired with an oar carved to match its partner like twins. You slide a hand along the loom of one oar and know that it isn't just a tool, it is a voting voice. Out here, no chieftain sits aloof on a throne. Decisions, when to reef the sail, where to hunt seals, how to split silver, rise and fall on the rhythm of blades dipping in unison. Row poorly, and the ship yaws. Row well, and every heart on board glides toward common destiny. The hull is floating parliament, courtroom, and choir loft all at once. Look amidships where a ring of river stones hems a shallow hearth. Fire will burn here day and night, its sparks dancing up through a skylight in the woolen awning. You realize that flame bridges worlds, warming damp tunics, charring fish for supper, and when night prayers begin, carrying whispered invocations toward unseen gods. Someone sets an iron cauldron over the embers, and the smell of herb-steeped ale mingles with salt and wet oak. As steam curls into the air, you understand why later sagas call this space the ship's belly. It digests hardship, cold spray, muscle ache, terror of unseen reefs, and converts it into camaraderie strong enough to row through endless twilight. The helmsman invites you aft to grasp the steering board. Its leather-wrapped handle is polished by countless palms. When you tug it, the vessel answers like a horse feeling light rein. Behind you, the carved dragonhead splits imaginary waves, but its fiercest power is psychological. Approaching strangers will read that grimacing snout and decide, perhaps wisely, to trade first, fight only if forced. The prow is a mask the entire crew wears, projecting unity through artistry. You think back to the funeral dragon that guarded the dead and recognize a continuum. Whether inhaling pyre smoke or racing whitecaps, a ship speaks with a single wooden face for people who speak with many tongues. Mid-morning brings a practice tack. The yard swings, the crimson sail bellies out, and wind fills every seam you watched stitchers labor over. Sailcloth snaps like a banner announcing arrival at some yet unraided shore. While hands scurry to trim lines, the skald perches near the mast and begins reciting an origin poem. You grasp that oral history relies on vessels not just to spread news, but to survive at all. Verses must be sturdy enough to ride waves from Iceland to Kiev, carried inside memory the way spare rivets ride in tool chests. If a lyric falters, a lineage may vanish as surely as a ship that founders beyond sight of land. Lean over the rail and study ripples that fan out from the bow. You remember the master builder explaining grain flow in each plank, and suddenly you see matching currents in social life. Fences around a farm, alliances between neighboring clans, even marriage ties. Everything here bends rather than breaks, overlapping like clinker boards for resilience. Ships don't merely mirror that philosophy, they teach it. Spend a season balancing a hull against crosswinds, and you learn to bend customs around new truths. Foreign gods, foreign coins, foreign spouses. Back on land, those lessons harden into polity, the first scaffolding of kingdoms still centuries from coronation. Around noon, oars ship home, and crewmen pull small chests from beneath benches. Inside lie amber beads, reindeer hides, and coiled silver bracelets ready for barter. The vessel, which moments ago felt like a floating barracks, now resembles a bustling market stall. You watch a rower weigh dirhams on a simple balance scale and realize that commerce isn't an afterthought. It is the blood coursing through these pine ribs. Profit funds the next voyage, pays for mosaics in a distant chapel, covers the bride price that cements an alliance. By afternoon, you grasp that wherever this ship beaches, whether invited or not, it will spawn a pop-up economy as inevitable as the tide. Yet trade never fully erases threat. Late in the day, a lookout spots antlered shapes along the forested bank, possible scouts of a rival clan. Instantly, shields lift to the gunwale, transforming colorful discs into a continuous wall of linden and iron. The crew's laughter hushes, fingers tighten on spear shafts. You feel tension vibrate through oak strakes, as if the very hull can read the change in heartbeats. No clash comes today, but the drill reinforces hard truth. The ship is both chapel and fortress. Its sanctity demands defense, and its mobility ensures that defense can turn into sudden strike wherever advantage tilts. Night falls, and the steersman beaches the vessel on a gravel spit slick with moonlight. Fire flares again, this time beneath a spit of lake trout. After supper, the oldest woman aboard sprinkles ale over the prow and murmurs words older than runestones. You notice how every head bows, even those boasting Frankish swords or silk trimmed in Byzantine gold. Faiths may mingle, but the act of hallowing a hull remains non-negotiable. Out here, spiritual practice is environmental management. Gods keep the storms in check. Ancestors keep the keel from worm rot. Spirits of river and cedar promise safe landing. Prayer becomes as practical as caulking. Before you crawl under a sealskin cloak, the skald begins a new tale. This one of a cosmic ship built from the fingernails of the dead, destined to sail at the world's final dawn. You shiver, half in cold, half in awe, and recognize myth as risk management. By imagining a vessel that outlives creation, these sailors shrink tomorrow's dangers to manageable scale. A squall can't be truly fatal when your worldview already contains an apocalypse ship. At worst, you are rehearsing for a mythic finale. You drift asleep to the creak of hull timber settling with the tide. In your dreams, the shoreline widens into an endless archipelago, each island waiting for a keel scrape, a trade bargain, a raid, or a treaty sealed under rippling sails. When dawn returns, you will rise again to oars and wind, but you will do so knowing you belong to something larger than crew or clan. The vessel beneath you has proved it can be hearth, court, temple, armory, and marketplace, sometimes in the span of a single day. You clutch the oak splinter still in your pouch and finally understand. Wood, iron, wool, and tar have been alchemized into identity. Carry that realization into the next horizon, and every wave will read like a page in your own unfolding saga. You open your eyes to a sky the color of beaten pewter, the faint rumble of surf somewhere beyond rising dunes. The ship that served yesterday as floating parliament now crouches like a restless wolf at the water's edge, sail furled, oars stacked, hull itching for distance. Somewhere in your bones, you feel the tension that has spread across all of Scandinavia, an impatience fed by gossip of fractured kingdoms to the south and west. Word travels faster than any messenger. The empire of Charlemagne lies divided among squabbling heirs. Saxon kings on Britain's east coast bicker behind wooden palisades, and Frankish counts raise tithes so high their own peasants pray for outside relief. No fortress has yet heard your dragon-headed prow growl, but the moment feels imminent, like air holding its breath before a storm. You kneel by a map scratched in sand with a stick of driftwood. Each line is a rumor. A monastery rumored fat with silver, a river estuary guarded by a few half-hearted sentries, a merchant fair whose toll collectors doze at noon. None of the cartography is precise, but precision is less important than possibility. What you trace is a web of vulnerabilities, openings where a swift hull and a determined crew can slip through and rewrite someone else's story. You realize expansion is not simply greed, it is physics. Resources at home, iron, arable land, marriage prospects, are finite. Every ambitious headman carves inheritance into smaller plots. Every younger son stares at shrinking horizons. The logical response is movement. When you stand, a raw wind funnels down the fjord, filling your cloak like a sail. You sense the climate turning colder year by year, harvests thinning at the edges. Grain stores empty faster than elders predict, and livestock born weak rarely see spring. A voyage offers insurance. If rainfall fails in one valley, perhaps a raiding party returns laden with smoked fish, Frankish wine, even foreign slaves who can work new plots. Risk becomes a form of harvest, gathered not from soil, but from uncertainty. The steersman summons you aboard, and the crew pushes off. As oars bite, the lake that once felt vast shrinks behind you, replaced by salt-stung air and the rhythm of swells. You pass low islands where smoke spirals from charcoal pits, sign that other clans have begun forging their own fleets. There is an arms race of woodworking spreading like brush fire. Whoever builds fastest gains first pick of what lies across the sea. In that realization, you find urgency, the belief that delay equals defeat long before any blade is drawn. 2 days later, you nose into an open bay on the North Sea and anchor beside vessels from distant fjords. Along the strand, dozens of chieftains argue in overlapping dialects, yet a shared logic unites them. Strike quick, strike together, divide spoils by oath. Someone unfurls a scarlet banner stitched with silver wire. Another holds up a Christian reliquary already stripped from a coastal chapel. You watch negotiations unfold at a speed mainland lords would consider reckless. But speed is the currency here. Swift consensus, swift departure, swift attack. A plan discussed for weeks risks leaking through merchants and monks. A plan settled before dawn hits like thunder. That night, a seasoned raider named Gudmund spreads a tattered parchment beneath the firelight. He has walked the cloisters of Jarrow, disguised as a pilgrim, drunk watered ale with Kentish reeves, slipped coins to Frankish deserters. From these journeys, he knows where tideways run deepest, where levy forces muster slow, where abbots keep minters busy turning bullion into gleaming coins. He taps each mark with a soot-blackened finger, explaining that the true targets are not walls or towers, but calendars. If you arrive during harvest, defenders toil in fields. If you row upriver when court is in session, local garrisons accompany their lords inland, leaving coastal villages nearly bare. The revelation strikes you. Expansion is not blind aggression, but informed timing. The art of reading someone else's priorities and striking the moment they look away. Before first light, your hull joins a wolf pack of 10 ships cutting south along the coast of Frisia. You row in eerie silence, sail furled to avoid beacon watchers stationed on dunes. Sea fog muffles the creak of oarlocks, turning every man into a gray ghost. Hours later, bell towers peek through mist, stone needles above birch-roofed huts. You glimpse the glow of dawn on leaded glass windows and think of how many seasons of tithe paid for that sacred shimmer. What you intend to collect is interest compounded. At the helmsman's whistle, the sail unfurls, wind snaps canvas, and the fleet surges forward. Villagers on the strand freeze, stunned by color and noise, war horns blaring like wounded gods, shields pounding the gunwale, oars raised in salute. You realize that terror itself is a tool. Panic buys extra minutes before anyone bars a church door or hides the silver plate. As your boots hit wet sand, you understand every drill on your lake was rehearsal for this sprint. Crewmen fan out, pairs kicking cottage doors, one collecting coin, while the other watches the hedge line. You shoulder through the monastery gate, hammer haft ready, and find fewer guards than rumored. Ropes of garlic and parchment scrolls hang from rafters, but your eyes knife straight to what glitters: chalices, reliquaries, candle stands the size of oak saplings. You remember Gudmund's words, "Weight and melt value matter more than artistry," yet something in the filigree feels like power made visible. You scoop up both gold and knowledge. Minutes later, smoke curls from thatch. Sheep bleat untended. Bells toll a discord no monk intended. Back aboard, sweating from exertion, you tally spoils. Some silver goes into a communal chest. Other pieces, small rings, glass beads, slide into purses as morale bonus. Yet the greatest prize is not metal, but intelligence. Parchments listing treaty dates, toll stations, the feast days when garrisons feast too well. Every raid becomes reconnaissance for the next, each success layering into strategy. By dusk, a squall rises, and the fleet swings north to safe harbor on an unmarked sandbar. You study casualties, a cut across one rower's brow, a broken thumb, nothing mortal. For such reward, the price seems absurdly low. Around the fire, Gudmund calculates shares with a bone tally stick, while the Skald composes verses naming each participant. Immortality, you realize. Sjanais costs only a witness willing to remember. Yet beneath celebration flickers unease. A Saxon boy, seized for ransom, lies bound at the mast, eyes wide with a calculation of his own. You glimpse future retaliation in that stare. Coastal lords who will hire castles of stone, kings who will train cavalry to ride night and day. Expansion sparks counter-expansion. Your triumph plants the seed of someone else's defense. The ocean highway that carries your victories can just as easily ferry news of your tactics to rival shores. Days later, your fleet rows into a tidal estuary farther west. This time, the banners flying over a wooden fort rampart bear the cross and the dragon. Side by side, some local earl has hired Scandinavian mercenaries to drill his militia. You recognize kit similar to yours: round shields, nasal helmets, pattern-welded swords. The moment becomes a mirror. In your bid to exploit weakness, you have exported expertise. Where once you held monopoly on clinker hulls and surprise amphibious landings, imitators now replicate your edge for coin. You grasp a larger truth. Expansion is not linear conquest, but diffusion. Ideas webet pans. Even marriage alliances leak across battle lines and muddy identity itself. In council that night, chieftains debate next moves. Some argue for deeper thrusts inland along rivers thick with trade barge traffic. Others recommend steering west to newly whispered isles of sheep and soft-hearted monks, perhaps even beyond, into uncharted waters rumored to end at a continent of perpetual dawn. You realize the map you traced in sand has already grown obsolete, redrawn by every swing of a sword and every witness who escapes to tell the tale. What endures is not geography, but mindset, the willingness to scan horizons for instability and sail straight into its heart. As you climb the beach to sleep beneath overturned hulls, you feel the crunch of broken pottery shards underfoot, relics of older settlers who once thought this shoreline secure. Their history dissolves beneath your souls, yet your own story may one day crumble the same. Expansion buys time, wealth, notoriety, but never permanence. Still, lying beneath ribs of tarred oak, you decide the gamble is worth the price, because movement itself feels like meaning. In restless dreams, you watch the dragon prow stretch forward, not over seas alone, but over centuries, carrying your descendants to valleys where grapes fatten under hotter suns, and to icebound fjords where polar bears trudge past rune-carved stones. The urge to push outward has become instinct humming in your marrow, louder than temple bells or royal decrees. When dawn paintbrushes clouds with salmon pink, you rise ready to row again, pockets heavier with silver, head heavier with possibility. The shoreline ahead is only the next hypothesis. Somewhere beyond waits a river mouth wide enough to swallow your fleet, a king's treasury soft enough to melt, a people brave enough to answer raid with resistance, forging new worlds neither victor nor victim can yet imagine. You grip the oar, lock eyes with your crewmate, and feel the hull surge. Expansion, you now know, is less a destination than a perpetual tide, one you are sworn to ride as long as wood flexes, wind fills canvas, and rumor sketches pathways through the fog of other men's troubles. Mist still clings to your beard when the fleet noses into a tidal creek and the sea's brine fades into the earthy breath of inland marshes. Only yesterday, you hammered village gates, but today, the same hull that flashed terror along saltwater coasts slips almost noiselessly between banks stitched with reeds. You feel the pitch of the deck change as the helmsman orders oars stowed and sets a single sweep at the stern. Every splash now echoes like a drumbeat across hush green channels. This is not retreat. It is a pivot. Saltwater raiding taught you to strike fast. River water will teach you to appear where enemies believe geography itself guards them. Within an hour, the creek merges with a broad estuary whose color shifts from steel to coffee as silt thickens. Wind dies behind hedges of willow, yet you glide forward on momentum alone because your hull sits shallow enough to skate over mud. You could rake with your fingertips. A Frankish barge labors upriver ahead, crew cursing at a sandbar that barely slows you. You overtake them silently, only the carved dragon nose revealing your presence. The barge master crosses himself, stunned that a vessel so lean can carry spears, shields, and a dozen mail-shirted giants yet draw less water than his grain scow. You realize in that gawp lies half the advantage, surprise measured not in minutes, but in entire landscapes suddenly rendered vulnerable. Around a bend, the river forks. One branch curls toward a walled market town. The other threads farmland spangled with orchards. You recall counsel around last night's driftwood map. The true treasure inland is optionality. Roads bind wagons to predictable crossroads, but waterways grant you branching possibilities with every mile. Choose the town and haul away minted silver. Choose the farmsteads and fill your hold with salted pork and new slaves. Either path remains open until the instant you swing the steering board. In that freedom, you sense why generations will call rivers highways of the north, a phrase that flatters stone bridges yet bows to clinker planks. Approaching shallows, the crew leaps overboard and lifts the hull like carpenters hefting a broad plank. Mud sucks at boots, but 20 pairs of shoulders shift a 15-ton vessel across a spit of glistening clay. You have just executed a portage faster than a mounted scout can circle the next hill. On the far side, the water runs clear again, singing over pebbles. You push off, dripping, and it feels as though the river itself admits defeat, offering a fresh current to speed you deeper into lands whose parish priests still preach that devils lurk at sea, never imagining devils can shoulder a ship over earth. By midday, oak forest gives way to low hills. Villagers plowing narrow strips glance up, puzzled, because no one expects strangers to arrive upwind and upstream at once. You pass them by, intent on a larger prize, a royal villa rumored to store the autumn tax, barrels of honey, rolls of dyed wool, a chest of plate stolen from Lombard traders. Your informant was a Saxon bondsman freed during the last raid. Intelligence, you discover, flows upriver as easily as timber and wheat. Mid-afternoon sunlight slants through alder branches when you finally glimpse carved stone above the tree line. Instead of charging ashore, you steer into a tributary, drop the mast, and let the current tuck you beneath a canopy of leaves. The hull's dark tar blends with water so black it mirrors sky more than earth. Crewmates wrap shields in rawhide to muffle clank, and oarlocks are stoppered with wool. It occurs to you that the ship is no longer merely transportation. It is camouflage, siege tower, getaway horse, and floating warehouse in one. Any lord who wishes to counter you must build 4 separate tools, or invent your miracle in wood, iron, and tar. And that costs time he no longer owns. When dusk paints the river, copper you strike. 30 strides from Villa Gate, your men erupt from Aldershade, shields flaring like sunrise. Panic ripples through courtyard, and, as expected, defenders sprint toward the main road, hoping to bar the distant bridge. They never comprehend how you arrived. By the time a horn finally calls militia from upland farms, your crew has tilted open the grain silos, yoked 3 oxen for the ship's hold, and pried iron bands from cedar chests whose hinges were forged farther south than any man here has traveled. You retreat the way you came, gliding past torch-lit parties, searching roads that never mattered. Back aboard, you tally spoils beneath flickering hearthlight. Yet the ledger you value most marks knowledge, depths measured by pole, shoals mapped by instinct, watch-post routines memorized by eye. You inscribe these findings on a wax board because information is ballast that can be traded, gifted, or weaponized again. One crewman suggests selling your route map to a rival chieftain for a cut of his plunder. Another proposes escorting merchants in exchange for tolls. You hear echoes of a paradox taking shape. Ships designed for predation also unlock corridors of commerce. Violence births markets. Markets fund bigger fleets. Bigger fleets promise both richer raids and safer trade convoys. The river doesn't discriminate. It carries whatever ambition you load aboard. Several weeks later, the season turns, and with it, your bow. Snow rims distant peaks, while elm leaves rot in back eddy swirls. Rather than risk winter ice, you steer toward the sea. Still, the return journey feels nothing like retreat. Every village you spared now sees opportunity in your wake. Iron tools to swap, walrus ivory for ornaments, maybe even passage fees to pay if they want guarantee that next spring's fleet rows by in peace. You catch yourself drafting treaties in your head, a new kind of conquest inked by stylus instead of spear. At the estuary, brackish water slaps the hull and gulls wheel overhead. Waiting in anchorage lie ships you recognize from raids farther north, their holds stuffed with furs, amber, and glassware ransacked from a Rhineland abbey. Over shared ale, you swap charts, gossip, and hostages slated for sale in Dublin or Hedeby. You realize you have become a node in a lattice stretching from Irish bogs to Ural foothills. No single captain controls the entire network, yet everyone depends on its arteries, fjord to sea, sea to river, river to portage, then back again. Where camel caravans need oases, you need only water and men willing to haul hull over hummock. As winter gales roar, you beach your ship in a sheltered fjord, flip it onto greased rollers, and erect a turf shed around the hull. Craftsmen swarm like ants, tightening lashings, replacing a sprung rib, riveting a bronze patch where an arrow split a plank. The vessel that carried you through silent estuaries must endure North Atlantic tempests come spring, so every seam is wedged with tarred wool, every nailhead peened flush. While frost hardens ground outside, you study charts by fire glow and plot new lines that braid coast and river in loops dizzy enough to make a monk question divine order. On solstice night, elders gather in the longhouse and feast on smoked eel pulled from those same marshes that shielded your approach. Between boasts you hear quiet calculations. Which kings look weakest? Which markets thirst for walrus ivory? Which rivers remain untested? You realize the community now orbits around the potential energy of waterways. Fields still need sowing, but surplus means little if not convertible into silver. And silver flows best along currents you've mastered. Before sleep, you step outside and gaze at stars blistering the black sky. Ursa Major points north, but your thoughts drift south and east, tracing rivulets invisible to any constellation chart. Somewhere beyond that darkness, moonlight glints off Byzantine domes. Dirham coins clink in Rus strongholds. Vineyards ripen beside rivers whose names you can't yet pronounce. Each destination is a bead, and rivers the string you thread through them. You understand your era's audacity, to treat the known world like a necklace waiting to be assembled by keels and oars. When dawn finally blushes, you run a hand along the dragon head, now polished to mirror shine. Spring will melt ice, sails will billow, and once again you'll aim the prow where water carves its secret passages through the armor of empires. Roads might carry kings, but rivers carry change, swift, silent, and unstoppable. You have become that current, and the world downstream has no choice but to learn your name. You stand on a pebble beach where river water finally kisses open sea. The hull that once ghosted through alder shadows now rocking at anchor, impatient for wider horizons. In your ears, the marsh winds of yesterday still hiss, but salty spray already sharpens the air, promising a passage far rougher than any inland creek. Traders back upriver spoke of islands to the west where abbots weigh gold plates on altar scales, where kings quarrel behind earthen ramparts, and where no one yet understands how fast a red-striped sail can blot out the sunrise. The moment you feel the keel lift with the swell, you know the next venture won't end with a quick raid and a hasty retreat. Something larger is calling. An urge to plant roots in soil moistened by foreign rain. The crossing to those misty islands begins under a sky scraped clean by winter gales. Oars only guide you clear of sandbars before the square sail swallows the wind and the hull leaps forward like a hound slipped from leash. Days blur into a rhythm of creaking yards and booming canvas. At night, phosphorescent wakes trace serpents behind the stern, as though myth swims in your shadow. On the fifth dawn, gulls appear, first a few, then crowds screaming over black cliffs streaked white with guano. Landfall comes at a tidal inlet flanked by low stone walls and a cluster of beehive huts. The smell of peat fires drifts across heather. You realize the monks who built their sanctuary here believed the sea itself a moat, never suspecting that a ship built for rivers could also master oceans. Boots splash into shallows, swords glitter, and the monastery bell rings only twice before a blow from a war axe silences it forever. The loot is modest. Copper reliquaries, parchment, a jar of imported wine, but the psychological bounty is immeasurable. Word of your arrival will race along every pilgrimage track and merchant road, multiplying fear faster than plague. Yet even as you shove off with dripping sacks, you sense a subtle shift. Some crewmen linger on the beach, staring at the fertile pasture beyond the dunes. They pocket seeds along with silver, imagining barley rows under a gentler sun than their own stony fields allow. The raid plants an idea more alluring than gold: permanence. Weeks later, the fleet hugs an estuary farther south, rowing past wooden palisades barely taller than a grown man. Resistance stiffens here. Local thanes hurry to muster spearmen, but your ships glide upriver faster than horse messengers gallop along muddy tracks. A single fortified farmstead falls after a short skirmish. Its grain stores, cured meat, and iron tools overflow your holds until silver suddenly feels less urgent than supply lines. What began as piracy starts shading into occupation. You leave a dozen men and a half-finished longhouse behind, a beachhead where fresh crews can winter instead of risking icy seas back home. By first snow, the fleet chooses a tidal island near a vast mudflat dotted with wading birds. Tents rise. Smiths dig a forge pit. And by Yule, a timber hall stands on high ground, dragon-proud gables facing the sea like watchful sentries. You mark your calendar not by church festivals, but by practical milestones. The first pig slaughtered, the first well sunk, the first child born to a couple who met aboard ship. Around fires, you notice speech blending, Norse gutturals softening under Saxon vowels as prisoners barter words for warmth. With every shared story, boundaries blur. Raids are easier when you understand the prayers your targets mutter. Spring dawns with banners snapping above 100 new ships, many hammered together from local oak. This armada noses south along the coast, turning estuaries into waterborne highways that stitch separate raiding bands into something like an army. At the mouth of a broad river, you encounter stone towers flying the emblem of a distant emperor. Instead of a quick strike, your chieftains propose a demonstration. Sail straight past the forts on the rising tide, anchors up, shields out, horns singing. The garrison fires a few panicked bolts that clatter off overlapping linden discs. By dusk, you camp on an island beyond the reach of any relief force. 2 days later, you negotiate a payment to leave, and the Emperor's envoys deliver wagons of silver. Ransom, you realize, can outshine plunder. With each success, settlements along the coasts you once merely raided turn into seasonal markets where Norse, Saxon, and Frankish merchants haggle in a pigeon of gesture and coin. A town of wattle huts expands into a thriving port city, its quays lined with warehouses storing furs, amber, and silk that caravans drag across half a continent. You feel the gravitational pull of commerce altering ambitions. Farmers near your winter hall now sow barley specific for ale that fetches triple price among thirsty sailors. Blacksmiths experiment with pattern welding to sell blades prized by both native lords and foreign mercenaries. Prosperity begins to smell like legitimacy. Inevitably, conflict shifts from raids to politics. Local kings, bled by years of tribute, summon larger levies, while your chieftains dream of thrones, not treasure chests. A decisive clash erupts on a windswept field where ridge meets marsh. You stand in a shield wall 300 yards long, shoulder to shoulder with men who once shared nothing but oar benches. Arrows hum overhead. The ground churns into bloody porridge. But discipline forged on rolling decks holds firm. When the enemy line buckles, pursuit turns into land grab. Instead of sailing away, you march inland, posting garrisons at river crossings, granting farmsteads to warriors as payment. The map tilts. Hills and valleys once labeled with foreign runes now carry your own ink. Years slide by. Children born under thatch roofs pronounce local words with northern lilt. Some ride small, shaggy ponies across fields their fathers once torched. Law gatherings convene each autumn beside a massive oak where disputes over grazing rights mix with recitations of longboat epics. Coinage struck in nearby mints bears hybrid imagery, a cross on one side, a raven on the other, testament to overlapping sovereignties. You realize conquest has looped back into culture, weaving strands strong enough to anchor you long after swords dull. Peace, however, is never static. Across the channel, rumors speak of a coastal duchy where another band of settlers has negotiated land in exchange for protection, turning marshland into a bastion that watches both sea and inland road. Some call these men traders, others pirates. Names matter less than momentum. The concept of hiring raiders as buffers spreads like wildfire. You find yourself drafted into a diplomacy that feels stranger than war, pledging to guard shores you once plundered, receiving charters sealed with wax and Latin signatures. A land tax replaces ransom, and forts you build face outward against newer threats arriving from yet farther seas. Despite treaties, the Longship never loses its bite. When a distant monastery fails to pay the agreed tithe, your fleet answers with the old language of flame. But now you draft follow-up letters offering reconstruction services at a price. You realize you have become both arsonist and architect, weaving destruction and order into a single profit loop. Empires across the water take note, some branding you kings, others labeling you devils, yet all continue to trade because ships that once terrified them now carry the grain they need during drought. One summer afternoon, standing atop a chalk cliff overlooking your adopted coastline, you watch new arrivals beach their hulls on the strand below. Their accents carry more nasal Norse notes than your children's blended speech, and their eyes widen at the sight of stone churches and bustling markets where they expected ramshackle huts. You see in their wonder a reflection of your first landing, and you understand how cycles spin. The frontier keeps moving, westward, inland, sometimes back upon itself, but the engine remains the same. Audacity coupled with adaptable wood, iron, and will. Night falls, and torches flicker along the wharf, where a cargo of wool cloaks and smoked fish waits for a tide bound south. You touch the dragonhead adorning your own ship, its snout worn smooth from years of salt wind, and feel the grain beneath your fingertips like the rings of a living tree. Each groove marks a season, a raid, a harvest, a treaty. Together, they tell a story of transformation. You began as a raider probing weaknesses. You became a settler shaping landscapes. Now you stride both realms, half native, half foreign, a living bridge of cultures. The sea still calls, but so does the plowed field, and you realize at last that true power is not merely the ability to take, but the freedom to stay and watch what grows in the wake of your daring. A gray-blue spring dawn finds you standing on the wharf of a bustling Baltic hamlet whose name shifts with every tongue. Birka to Swedes, Bjorka to Danes, simply the market to Finnic trappers hauling sledges of sable pelts. You arrived from the western settlements with holds full of wool, amber, and the first minted coins bearing a raven beside a cross. Yet the silver weighs lighter than your restless mind, because gossip ripples across these docks of treasures flowing from an unseen south. Bright dirhams struck in distant Samarkand, ivory carved from walrus skulls, and silks so fine they fold like water. To reach them, you must follow rivers that stitch the continent like hidden veins. You barter your coastal craft for a lighter vessel, narrower beam, higher flare, cargo deck stripped to the essentials. The shipwrights here favor pine planks fixed with tree nails rather than iron, a concession to the long portages that await. You run a hand along the hull, fewer shields, more bales of trade goods, and a raised steerboard that can pivot clear of rocky shallows. Where your last voyage carried warriors, this one will carry risk measured in distance and diplomacy. The first passage east across the Gulf of Vinland feels deceptively familiar. Pine-shadowed shores, cries of sea eagles, a sky that never truly darkens as midsummer nears. But once you nose into the Neva River, the world tilts. Marsh reeds whisper in strange dialects, and Slavic travelers in skin coracles hail you with cautious curiosity. You trade a bronze pin for a few carved rune staves indicating hidden sandbars, their symbols blending Slavic curves with Norse spikes, evidence that others from your homeland have already etched knowledge into these waters. A day's pull-up the Neva brings you to Ladoga, a sprawling lakeside settlement exploding with energy. Longhouses built of pine interlock with turf-roofed earth lodges. Furnaces belch sparks as smiths reshape imported silver into spiral bracelets coveted along the northern forests. Here you see the alchemy of proximity. Finnic hunters unload fox and marten pelts. Baltic merchants deliver amber beads. And your own kin hawk swords whose pattern-welded cores still smell faintly of English iron. For a moment, you simply observe the babble of languages. Old Norse rolling against Old Church Slavonic, sprinkled with Arabic numerals barked by traders tallying coin. You realize you're no longer a foreigner or native. You're a node in a lattice stretching from tundra to desert. Your next leg follows the Volkhov south beneath archways of silver birch. The river runs swift, forcing you to master steering with a stern sweep, while rowers dig short, powerful strokes against the current. Villages cluster where tributaries meet. Each demands toll in bread, honey, or the service of sharpening plowshares. You pay willingly, because every welcome feast offers what coin cannot: information. Rumors flow like water. One hamlet warns of bandits wearing lamellar armor near a portage. Another whispers that Greek merchants in the far south will pay weight for weight in silk for northern furs. You scratch these clues onto a wax tablet, map pigments of opportunity onto the river's winding shape. At Novgorod, you encounter a council of warriors and traders so mixed in origin that oath rings jangle beside wooden icons of Eastern saints. They call themselves Rus, a word that tastes familiar yet foreign, like mead poured over foreign spices. Some wear Danish brooches, others Slavic linen. All swear fealty to a pact rather than a single king. You recognize the model, the ship as parliament, scaled up to an embryonic state. They invite you to contribute to a fortification project guarding the rapids farther south. In exchange, they guarantee passage and a share in customs collected from caravans. You accept, hammering stakes beside men whose grandfathers herded reindeer and others whose grandsires farmed Frankish valleys. Community, you learn, can be nailed together one log palisade at a time. Summer dwindles. Dirhams clink in your purse, thin, bright, stamped with flowing script you cannot read. Yet value more than gold, for they travel farther. With winter ice weeks away, you press on along the Dnieper. This river is a different beast, broad, sulking under fog, littered with granite outcrops that spawn rapids roaring like coastal surf. At each cataract, you haul the empty vessel onto ash rollers, shoulders numb, boots biting into spongy moss. Local guides sing work chants older than runestones, timing heaves to drum beats so precise you feel the craft glide across earth, as if remembering waves beneath her keel. Past the rapids, the land opens into steppe, endless grass rippling under hawk shadows. You skirt nomad camps where horsemen trade steppe ponies for glass beads and iron arrowheads. One chieftain admires your axe, but prefers a water-hardened birch bow. You exchange gifts and names, sensing that alliances here hinge on gestures rather than borders. Silver circulates, but prestige travels faster, stamped into memory by generosity and lethal reputation. Weeks later, domes of hammered bronze rise on the horizon. Kiev, a hill fortress where timber walls embrace Greek merchants, Slavic farmers, and Norse adventurers like yourself. Markets bustle beneath banners stitched with equal parts Christian crosses and pagan beasts. Here, dirhams change hands in burlap sacks, honey cakes sell beside amphorae of Mediterranean wine, and rumors swirl of yet another river, the Dniester, leading toward the Black Sea, where a city of marble pays its elite guard in gold leaf and silk. You know the city by name whispered back on Baltic piers: Miklagard, the great city, Constantinople. Winter storms trap you in Kiev, but ice settles agreements as firmly as swords. You bind yourself to a trade caravan slated for spring, pledging axes and shields in exchange for a third of the profits. Nights pass in smoky halls where storytellers blend sagas of Western raids with tales of Byzantine emperors who dine beneath mosaicked ceilings. Every yarn ends the same: fortunes beyond counting for those bold enough to journey south, and honor beyond pricing for those accepted into the emperor's household guard. Thaw turns the Dnieper into a glassy road. Your convoy drifts past bluffs where fortresses bristle with new palisades, evidence that last season's tribute has already been reinvested in defense. Farther down, outlaws try to ambush from willow thickets, but your archers fire first, arrows whistling down like sleet. You leave 2 boats burning on a sandbank as warning. Violence remains a language everyone on these rivers speaks fluently. The delta opens onto the Black Sea, a living mirror under sun so harsh it bleaches the dragon prow to washed bone white. Salt-crusted, weary, yet unbroken, you tack along the coast until limestone cliffs give way to the triple walls of Constantinople. Even from miles out, the Theodosian ramparts dwarf anything you've ever seen, their crenellations sun-glinting like a necklace of knives. Protocol here requires diplomacy. You furl the sail, raise a banner marked with twin ravens, and await the imperial harbor master. When permission comes, it arrives with scrolls in polished Greek and a pilot skiff crewed by men wearing crimson cloaks. Inside the Golden Horn, commerce roars at a pitch Burka could never imagine. Spice barges from Alexandria ride anchor beside triremes painted vermilion. Priests chant liturgy on marble quays, while vendors hawk candied figs under awnings of Tyrian purple. Your cargo of furs and slaves fetches obscene prices, dirhams traded for solidi of pure gold. Yet what dazzles you most is an offer whispered by a palace eunuch. Enlist in the Varangian Guard, warriors prized for loyalty unbound by local politics, paid in cash and cloth of gold, free to leave with bonuses after years of service. You weigh the proposition against the yearning for your own hall in the north, and decide service can be another form of investment. Glory gilds a reputation that will echo across every river bend. Training within the Bucolian Palace complex transforms you. Chainmail is swapped for scaled lamellar, bearded axes for heavier, single-bladed labris designed to shatter shields in phalanx warfare. You march beside men from Gotland, Jutland, even Iceland. Their tongues differ, yet cadence of oaths sounds identical. Standing guard at the emperor's side during Easter procession, you watch candles flicker over mosaics depicting saints whose names you can barely pronounce. Still, awe and practical calculation intertwine. Each ceremony you survive adds weight to future negotiations when you return north flush with pay and prestige. Years later, when your commission ends, you board a stout merchantman bound for the Dnieper mouth. In your sea chest lie gold coins stamped with Christ Pantocrator, rolls of damask, and a small illuminated gospel you cannot read but intuitively revere. You sail upriver past towns that once trembled before steel, but now welcome you with toll bells because your name, seasoned by imperial service, precedes you. In Novgorod, an assembly elects to gift you a parcel of riverside land in exchange for advising their militia. You accept, planting both wheat and influence. On crisp autumn evenings, you sit outside your new hall, watching sun sink behind poplar groves reflected in placid water. Children play along the jetty, their hair the color of flax, their lullabies stitched from Slavic and Norse refrains. You trace calluses on your palm, reminders of oars, axe hafts, shield rims, and sense that the voyage has come full circle. From raider to settler in the west, from trader to imperial guardsman in the south, now elder statesman in the east. The ship always pointed forward, yet the rivers taught you that forward can bend, fork, and loop back in unexpected confluences. Some nights, a moonlit ripple recalls the Neva mist or Black Sea glare, stirring wanderlust in your marrow. You imagine steersmen still pushing dragon prows into uncharted tributaries, caravans threading the steppe, Byzantine diplomats calculating exchange rates for pine masts and walrus ivory. The network you helped weave hums without pause, a web of water roads tying birch forests to marble palaces. You smile, knowing that long after your oars rest, currents will carry new faces, new cargoes, perhaps even new gods. Rivers remember everyone who passes, but they belong to none. A truth you now carry like a coin, worn smooth by countless trades. You lean against the rail of a broad-beamed merchant ship as dawn spills over the Vistula lagoon, tinting the water pink like watered wine. Trousseau lies ahead, row upon row of thatched warehouses, a palisade bristling with fir stakes, and a forest of masts bobbing in the haze. From a distance, the place looks peaceful, almost pious, but you know better. By midday, this harbor will ring with barter and laughter. By moonrise, half the men now warming their hands over cook fires will be planning raids 2 valleys away. You have come to study that paradox, to profit from it, and perhaps to steer it for your own gain. When your keel grinds into soft sand, stevedores wade out, joking in a jumble of Old Norse, Prussian, and Low German. You unload bales of sable pelts, slabs of beeswax, and armfuls of Bulgarian icons acquired upriver, goods gathered during 2 seasons of trade that sometimes blurred uncomfortably into blackmail. The harbor master tallies weights on a slate board and collects a dock fee in dirhams so worn the silver looks like slick river stone. As you step onto the wharf, you slip the man an extra coin to learn which foreign merchants arrived overnight. Information here buys breathing room, the way steel buys respect. A short walk up the main street carries you past longhouses whose doors stand open to advertise wares. The first reeks of tar and boiled leather, ship repair. Next comes a goldsmith's booth, where a dwarfing necklace of twisted silver glints in the gloom. Across from it, a Frankish wine vendor siphons pale vintage into clay jugs, his eyes darting to see who might pay an honest coin and who might prefer an off-the-books swap for captured reliquaries. You sense the pulse of the town. Honest commerce beats in daylight, but the heart's murmur changes pitch once shadows lengthen. At the central market square, you spread a hide on packed earth and arrange your pelts in tidy rows. Prices start high. No one expects to pay them. Haggle becomes theater. Jokes about moth damage, insults leveled at boat builders from Bornholm, oaths to pagan gods, and muffled crossings of oneself when a Christian relic changes hands. Coin rattles like hail on a longhouse roof. Yet each sale echoes an unspoken question. Where did you really get this? Everyone here pretends the question doesn't matter, so long as the price feels right. That shared shrug is the unwritten charter of Trousseau. Near midday, a lanky youth you half recognize approaches with a grin too wide to be innocent. He once served as interpreter on your Neva voyage. Now he claims to manage security for a consortium of traders. He whispers that 3 warships slipped into a hidden inlet north of town last night. Their captains carry surplus altar plate from raids along the Saxon coast and need to turn it into usable silver before local bishops hear rumors. The youth offers an introduction, for a fee, naturally. You arrange to meet at dusk, reminding yourself that high profit walks arm in arm with high betrayal. Afternoon wind carries the smell of peat smoke and roasting pork. You duck into a side alley and enter a mead hall where benches crowd a central hearth. Patrons hunch over boards marked with Hnefatafel squares, pushing bone pieces while betting on everything from horse races to harvest yields. A bard strums a lyre and sings of heroes who raid by night, then sell their plunder to the very victims come sunrise. The crowd laughs because the song cuts close to truth. Farmers may curse pirates in church, yet queue to buy cheap iron nails hammered from monastery gates. You nurse a horn of ale and watch a priest in plain robes haggle for vellum sheets plainly scraped from seized gospel books. Even sanctity has a resale value. Dusk bleeds purple when you follow the lanky youth beyond Trousseau's palisade onto a moonlit path flanked by reed beds. A hand signal brings 3 figures from the shadows, captains with oiled beards, mail shirts tucked under traveling cloaks, dragon-headed brooches gleaming at their throats. They lay a linen cloth on rabbit-nibbled grass and reveal goblets crusted with gemstones, candelabra twisted into travel-size lumps, and a reliquary shaped like a dove, its wings dented where someone pried it off an altar. You examine each piece, weighing metal quality against risk. Melted down, the haul could pass for honest bullion, but move it too slowly, and word will reach Saxon envoys already sniffing for stolen church plate. You strike a deal. 20 pounds of silver now. Another 10 after the loot is recast into blank ingots. In return, you escort their next voyage south, officially to trade hides, unofficially to identify abbeys with weak garrisons. As hands clasp in oath, you notice one captain's thumb bears a fresh cut, proof he's sworn by blood to honor the bargain. Yet you also see his eyes flick left, measuring distance to his sword pommel. Trust here is a credit line renewed nightly. Back in town, you stash the loot in a cellar beneath the goldsmith's booth. The smith is an old accomplice who specializes in scrubbing sins from metal. Tomorrow, he'll melt chalices, skim off gems, and cast plain bars stamped with his maker's rune, a symbol that tells any buyer the silver is clean, meaning no bishop can trace it. The smith will keep a sliver as payment, and you'll fence the rest through Novgorod agents who pretend never to have heard of Trousseau. In daylight, commerce again. Before sleeping, you stroll the waterfront. Moon ripples across anchored hulls, masts creaking like restless gallows. Somewhere upriver, farmers patch roofs torn by raiders who just sold you their booty. Somewhere downriver, bishops lodge complaints with kings already in debt to fleets they cannot outbuild. You realize you straddle 2 economies, one of oaths and axes, the other of scales and seal rings. They feed each other, predator and host locked in a dance too lucrative for either to quit. Morning breaks with gull cries and hammer clang as smiths start casting. You supervise weighing while the goldsmith's furnace roars. Liquid silver pours into antler-carved molds, hissing like serpents as it cools. Each ingot emerges dull gray, no longer a relic, merely metal. You stack them in a chest, already picturing exchange rates in distant markets. Yet conscience pricks. A scrap of melted reliquary still bears a Latin inscription. You toss it back into the crucible, erasing the last line between sacred and profane. By afternoon, word of a possible Saxon embassy spreads through town. The harbormaster posts a notice: no foreign warships to depart until the envoys are received. Traders grumble. Captains hide contraband under fish barrels. You read the edict and smile. Delay is opportunity. Tonight, while officials dine, you'll sail upriver under cover of taking on fresh water. In truth, you'll collect a cache of weapons hidden in marsh grass, spears destined for Polish tribes eager to challenge a neighbor's tribute system. You calculate profit 3 ways: sale of ingots, sale of arms, and potential contracts to escort tribal raids that will, in turn, produce more loot to launder. That evening, torchlight flickers along dock planks slick with fish scales. You board your vessel, barking orders to rowers who know secrecy counts for speed. As oars dip, you glance back at Trousseau's palisade. The town glows like an ember, merchants tallying sails, guards pacing ramparts, and in shadowed doorways, raiders whispering over fresh maps. You understand now why some call this place the hinge of the sea. Gates open for trade by day, then swing wide for plunder after dusk. You belong to both worlds, fluent in the dialect of coin and the dialect of fear. Upstream, reeds swallow your hull, muffling the splash of oars. Stars freckle the river, guiding you deeper into night's business. Tomorrow, you'll haggle again under the honest sun, wearing the mask of a respectable merchant. But for the next few hours, you travel in the company of outlaws, cargo hold echoing with clink of silver still warm from the furnace. Your life, like the town you just left, thrives on the thin seam where market stalls meet midnight fires. And as long as boldness outpaces law, that seam will never close. Your fortunes swell in step with your reputation, yet success comes tethered to a new chain: the rising power of King Harald, whose heralds sail from fjord to fjord, demanding taxes and pledges of lifelong fealty. One twilight you stand aboard your freshly tarred Longship, its hold still perfumed by melted reliquary silver from Trousseau, and watch the royal pennant flutter over a neighboring estate. You recognize the message. Your ships, your men, even your very name are expected to bend beneath a single crown. The Baltic taught you the rules of commerce and shadow. Harold intends to replace both with a ledger and a law only he can amend. Something inside you rebels. Freedom tastes of salt and risk, not parchment sealed with wax. Around the hearth that night, talk turns from markets to migration. A gray-bearded trader recounts rumors of a vast sea beyond the northern isles where far-flung homesteads grow rye, taller than a man's belt. Others speak of outlaw chiefs already cutting turf walls on a place called Iceland, sending back word that streams run clear and no king's steward walks the valleys. You feel sparks in every eye around the fire. Gold loses its glitter when weighed against independence. The decision forms like frost on winter grass. You'll follow the whale road west to a land where the only limits are horizon and courage. Preparation begins at once. You refit the hull for blue water, adding extra ribs, stowing sheep and pregnant goats, and stocking casks of buttermilk thick enough to survive hard freeze. Families arrive with cedar chests packed tight with iron tools and soapstone hearthstones. They also lug quarrels and blood feuds that cannot follow them onto open water. The deck becomes a floating village long before the keel leaves its cradle. On departure morning, women smear the prow with sacrificial blood, howling a prayer that wind and wave respect your audacity. As oars bite the fjord, you glimpse Harold's banner one last time atop a distant hill, tiny, rigid, already irrelevant. The North Atlantic greets you with moods that turn faster than a thief's eyes. Dawn sunlight glitters like molten silver, yet by midday, snow squalls lash the sail so hard you fear the yard will snap. Still, the ship holds steady, her shallow draft skipping over swells. Ravens you kept in a wicker basket serve as living compasses. Released one by one, each circles until it spots land or tires and returns. On the third release, a raven angles decisively west and doesn't come back. Hope spreads through the crew like mead warmth. When the fog finally unzips, green cliffs rise from pewter waters. Shetland, then Faroe. Stepping stone kingdoms of grass-roofed huts and welcome fires. You trade yarn and salted lamb for fresh water and tales of whales beaching farther west each spring, a sign of richer feeding grounds and perhaps richer pastures beyond. Every story stiffens your resolve. By the time you sight Iceland's black volcanic shoreline, the ship feels less like escape and more like destiny under sail. Landfall at a sheltered cove smells of sulfur and promise. Steam vents hiss from moss-padded earth while wild horses graze knee-deep in tussock grass. You drive a carved post into the beach to claim territory, its head shaped like the dragon prow that ferried you here. According to old custom, wherever the pillar drifts ashore will mark your homestead, but you secretly hope it never strays far. The valley spreading inland already looks like a dream carved from basalt and ice. First months test that dream. Volcanic soil needs lime, turf walls leak under sleet, and darkness lingers so long you forget the sun's angle at spring equinox. Yet challenges forge community. You and your neighbors establish a weekly thing at a riverside rock shelf. Disputes over grazing rights or runaway thralls are settled amid poetry recitations and communal feasts. Because no king claims these valleys, law must flow from consensus, hammered out like iron between two anvils, argument and necessity. You watch former raiders learn rhetoric, see former captives rise as free tenants, and realize a society is being invented in real time, etched not in stone, but in memory. Years roll forward. Your eldest builds a boathouse on a fjord. Your youngest learns to read Latin from monks who fled the same tyranny you once profited from. Trade routes stretch back east. Stockfish, wool cloth, and walrus ivory leave Icelandic harbors, while dirhams and silk travel the opposite way. Freedom proves fertile, yet restlessness stirs again. Word reaches your thing of a fiery-haired exile named Eric, who sailed still farther west and found not mist but a vast ice-rimmed coast he calls Greenland. He claims fjords mild enough for pasture and bays teeming with seals. You recall the raven's bold flight, feel the old tug of horizon, and volunteer to join his next expedition. Crossing the Denmark Strait in midsummer sun feels like rowing into a crystal mirror. Bergs the size of stave churches drift silent as ghosts. Their undersides glow aquamarine, beautiful and deadly. You skirt them at dawn when winds lie flat, listening for the groan of shifting ice. After weeks of fog and glare, a sawtooth ridge appears, snow-capped yet skirted by emerald belts of grass. Greenland. You beach in a narrow fjord where waterfalls ribbon down slate cliffs and knee-high juniper perfumes the air. Summer here is fierce but fleeting. You have until first frost to raise turf walls, store hay, and salt enough seal meat to outlast winter nights rumored to crack iron nails with their cold. Life tightens in Greenland. Fields yield only what sweat and seaweed fertilizer coax from thin soil. Yet walrus herds haul out on sandbars by the hundreds, their tusks worth fortunes in both European courts and Baghdad markets. Each hunting season, you lead rowing crews through iceberg mazes, balancing wealth against freeze and drowning. Some seasons you prosper, others you bury comrades beneath stone cairns. The wind will scour nameless within a year. You begin to understand that freedom bought with distance charges ongoing rent in hardship. Around the longhouse fires, conversation drifts toward an even wilder rumor: rich timber and self-seeding wheat on a coast beyond Greenland's western ice. Bjarni, a merchant blown off course, claims he glimpsed low hills cloaked in grapevines, something no northerner has tasted since leaving Frankish markets. Your eldest son, grown now, sketches courses on a walrus skin map, and begs to captain a voyage. You hesitate, weighing peril against that spark you once chased across every horizon. Finally, you grant him the family ship, older but proven, and offer advice learned from ice and open water. Trust the birds, carry more drinking water than you think possible, and remember that retreat is sometimes the most daring course. Months pass before a sail reappears on Greenland's horizon. The returning crew bursts into the longhouse flush with stories of beaches littered with driftwood and land so fertile grass clung to their boots. They call the place Vinland, land of wine, for the wild grapes they found along sheltered riverbanks. They speak, too, of curious natives with slender canoes who traded furs for red cloth, but later returned with spears tipped in bone. Opportunity and danger intertwine again, a braid you know well. You lead a larger expedition the following spring. 3 ships, 20 families, sacks of barley seed, and pregnant cattle mooing anxiously in makeshift stalls. The crossing southwests along Greenland's lee, then darts across open ocean to the newfound coast. You anchor in a bay where salmon leap against river current stronger than any in Iceland. Cabins rise, wheat takes root, and hope blossoms. Yet tension with the indigenous Skraelings escalates. Misread gestures, thefts blamed on wind or spirit, then arrows flying from tree line. A midnight council weighs whether enduring war outweighs the land's blessings. Memories surface, embers of villages you once raided, merchants in trousseau parting with silver for stolen chalices. The past sits beside you like an unseen guest whispering consequences. In the end, you order evacuation, loading ships with timber and grapes and tales to feed sagas for generations. As Vinland's coastline recedes, you stare at the forest fringe, sensing both loss and relief. You have proven the ocean is a road, not a wall, yet some crossroads carry tolls you cannot accept. Greenland receives you like an austere parent, harsh, demanding, but familiar. Iceland later welcomes rare timber beams sawn from Vinland's pines. Craftsmen carve them into high-seat pillars that stand in halls long after your bones bleach on Arctic stone. Years later, children gather when you speak of the West, of auroras rippling over icebergs, of meadows where strawberries redden in midsummer dusk, of mistakes made when strangers meet without shared tongue or treaty. You tell them freedom is never a final harbor. It's the wake behind a ship always pressing into darker, wider water. Some listeners will stay to tend sheep in silent valleys. Others will track whale spouts toward fresh horizons. Either choice honors the legacy etched in your palms by oars and rigging. To live is to voyage, and to voyage is to gamble that distance can transform constraint into possibility. As you finish the tale, you trace the grain of the table. Oak first felled in Norway, traded through trousseau, ferried to Iceland, then Greenland. Wood, silver, and stories all share one truth. They change hands, shapes, and meanings without ever losing the pulse of their origins. You close your eyes and still feel the tilt of deck beneath your feet, the hush before dawn at sea. Somewhere beyond the longhouse walls, the Atlantic sighs against ice and rock, forever inviting those brave enough to push beyond the edge of every known map. You leave Greenland's wind-flayed headlands behind just as the first winter stars pierce the dusk, rowing northeast across a steel-gray sea that once seemed endless. When you last sailed these waters, you were fleeing the reach of a single crown. Now, curiosity pulls you back toward it. Word has drifted west on every trader's tongue. Back home, old rivalries have been yoked beneath kings who answer only to God and coin. You want to see whether the fjords of your youth have really traded clan feuds for banners stitched with golden crosses. The voyage feels different from your reckless dash toward Iceland years ago. Your crew is mixed. Young Greenlanders eager to glimpse the lands their parents abandoned, and weathered shipmates carrying iron-bound chests heavy with walrus ivory. Each night, you share tales of Vinland strawberries and of spear-laden standoffs with the Skraelings, but the younger rowers keep steering talk toward rumors of colossal timber halls and circular fortresses rising on Danish plains. They speak the names Harald and Bluetooth with equal parts awe and skepticism, as if monarchs were myths stitched by skalds. You remind them that power does not need belief to exist. It only needs taxes. Landfall comes on Norway's cragged coast beneath cloud stacks the color of hammered pewter. Where once scattered farms hugged every rock shelf, you find a royal landing pier watched by mailed sentries in matching cloaks. Their discipline is unnerving. No drunken boasting, no casual laughter. Only layered silence broken by clipped commands. You present a trading pass bearing a wax seal impressed with a snarling beast, and they wave you through after noting every head aboard. Order, you realize, is now an exportable commodity. Up the valley, the annual thing no longer meets on a bare hilltop. Instead, timber palisades enclose a law court paved with dressed stone. A royal steward presides, flanked by scribes who dip goose quills into imported ink pots. Disputes are recorded, fines entered into ledgers, verdicts confirmed under the sign of the cross as surely as under the old gods. You listen while two farmers argue over grazing rights. Their oaths invoke Saint Olaf rather than Thor, and each quotes royal statutes as confidently as a skald quotes verse. Codified law replaces vendetta, yet you feel the edge of compulsion lurking beneath every meticulous clause. On the third night, Harold Fairhair's heralds arrive in cloaks edged with fox fur dyed deep blue. They announce a ship levy. Every district must furnish men and hulls for a summer campaign against rebels clinging to the old autonomy in the far north. You remember cutting loose from these very levies to chase freedom across open ocean. Now your neighbors debate not whether to comply, but how best to exceed the quota to win royal favor. The king rewards generosity with iron trade monopolies, they explain, and with timber felling rights in forests once held in common. Resistance, they whisper, brings confiscation. You watch bargaining infect loyalty, wondering whether gold is more binding than blood. Curiosity drives you south across the Skagerrak to Denmark. There, news of consolidation becomes impossible to ignore. Near the Limfjord mouth, you crest a low rise and glimpse a circle so vast you first mistake it for a natural hill. Moving closer, you realize it is a perfectly geometrical earthen wall flanked by timber ramparts, one of those ring forts attributed to Harold Bluetooth. Inside, rows of longhouses radiate like spokes, their doors aligned with the cardinal winds. Every beam is cut to uniform length, each door shielded by identical carved beasts. The fort feels less like a stronghold than a diagram etched into earth, a declaration that chaos itself has been measured and tamed. You barter seal oil for permission to stay the night. At dusk, candles gild the gatehouses, and priests chant Latin hymns that bounce off the ramparts in waves. Warriors kneel for blessing before retiring to barracks where rules are posted on painted boards. Drill hours, meal portions, penalties for theft. You taste the stew, barley thickened with carrots and pork, and realize even supper is standardized. Efficiency replaces improvisation. Discipline replaces daring. Yet outside the walls, merchants hawk amber and imported wine, thriving on the security these forts project across the realm. You cannot deny the prosperity humming through market stalls. Farther south, at Jelling, Twin burial mounds rise like sleeping shields, and between them stands a rune-carved stone taller than 3 men. Its runes proclaim that King Harald won all of Denmark and Norway and made the Danes Christian. You trace the grooves with a calloused thumb. The serpent bands still twist in pagan style, but Christ's figure towers at their center. A priest explains that conversion spreads fastest when welded to fiscal incentives. Embrace the cross, and royal collectors reduce your tithe. Cling to Thor, and expect a visit from the axe. You remember the blood-smeared prow that once carried you to Iceland, and wonder how many old gods survive in private whispers behind painted shutters. Yet power concentrates more than faith. In Roskilde's shipyard, you count keel after keel laid for vessels larger than any raiding fleet of your youth. Broad-beamed cargo ships designed not for plunder, but for timber, grain, and praying pilgrims. The foreman boasts that Sven Forkbeard plans to use such leviathans to ferry an army across the North Sea, not for hit-and-run raids, but to seize crowns. He speaks of England as a ledger entry waiting to be reconciled. You picture the English monks who once trembled at your dragon prow. Soon they may send tribute willingly, their silver tallied in the same scripts used at royal courts here. Returning north, you stop at a fjord where smaller chieftains still cling to wooden halls adorned with antler racks and carved idols. They greet you with warmth, but whisper fearfully of royal inspectors who will arrive after harvest to audit livestock and enforce church attendance. You share smoked salmon and recall Greenland's brutal winters, Vinland's abandoned fields, and the turbulent equilibrium of Trousseau's market nights. Freedom, you realize, is never absolute. It simply shifts its margins. The ocean once offered escape from kings, but monarchs have learned to sail farther, build bigger, legislate deeper. Back aboard your ship, you chart a course that skirts the coast rather than plunge into open sea. You carry cargo now, striped wool cloth for royal granaries, iron nails forged to fortress specifications, beeswax earmarked for church candles. Profit lies in serving order rather than eluding it. Yet you stash a single cedar chest beneath the aft bench. Inside, a strip of Vinland grapevine carefully dried and wrapped in sealskin. It reminds you that horizons remain even when crowns spread like gilded nets. One chill dawn, while gulls circle pale water, you weigh anchor beneath cliffs where your family's ancestral farm once stood. Smoke rises from its chimney, but a standard bearing Harald's knotwork flaps on the roof beam. Your kin greet you warmly, yet speak of quotas, of parish tithes, of royal messengers who record each birth and death. Children memorize psalms instead of sagas, though they still sneak out at night to carve runes into driftwood, hiding them under mattresses like contraband dreams. You stay through harvest, watching grain pour into royal barns under the gaze of armed reeves. The system works. Fewer feuds, fuller storehouses, roads patrolled against bandits. Yet when winter deepens and the sea ice thickens, you feel longing twist inside like a rope pulled taut. One clear night, stars shine so bright the Milky Way looks like a spilled sack of salt. You remember following that shimmering road toward Iceland, Greenland, and beyond. The world is larger now for kings and their fortresses, but larger still for anyone willing to chase the thin seam where law and possibility meet. So you gather trusted hands, load the hold with surplus grain bought cheap at the king's fixed price, and whisper of markets east of the Baltic where bread is dear and royal reach fades among pine shadows. The prow you bless with both cross and hammer, hedging bets. At departure, the steward demands your destination. You answer trade voyage and flash a stamped permit. On paper, you serve the realm. On water, you serve the horizon. As the Longship noses out of the fjord, oars bite cold black glass and the wind bellies the sail. Behind you, fortresses and runestones stand immovable, their weight undeniable. Yet beneath your feet, the deck flexes with every swell, reminding you that wood still bends where stone will crack. Power may fill valleys with laws and towers, but the sea keeps its own counsel. And you, born of its restlessness, intend to keep listening. Moonlight slides across your sail as you ease out of the royal harbor. Paperwork stamped and taxes paid, yet purposefully vague about your destination. The king's inspectors believe you are bound for Gotland with flax and wax, but your mind is already drifting far beyond the Baltic. In crowded alehouses, you have heard fresh rumors. The emperor in Constantinople is hiring again. His palace eunuchs comb the northern markets for tall warriors who wield axes like brushwood and obey no local faction, men who will guard a throne whose own generals cannot be trusted. Imperial recruiters pay in gold, silk, and, more enticing still, in stories that swell a warrior's legend long after the silver is spent. You have traded across half the known world. Now you wonder what it would mean to become the trade good yourself. Your longship hugs the Swedish coast, then slips through the Åland Straits into the Gulf of Finland. Each port echoes with talk of a single road. South by Ladoga, down the Volkhov, through Novgorod, and past the roaring Dnieper Rapids to the Black Sea. You know parts of that artery well, but this voyage carries a different cargo. 30 eager fighters sworn to your banner and a pair of royal nephews whose restless ambition worries their uncle back in Denmark. Better to point them toward foreign glory than let them ferment domestic rebellion. Novgorod greets you with wooden palisades and the smell of resin. The local vesh, the town assembly, waives most customs fees after learning you plan to escort luxury goods to Byzantium. A healthy Varangian convoy keeps bandits away from their own merchants. You trade a barrel of salt cod for a flotilla of shallow draft monoxyla canoes, perfect for hauling people and plunder across portages where a longship cannot float. By the time spring thaw turns snowpack into churning rapids, your column resembles a traveling court. Warriors in ringmail, Slavic traders with carts of beeswax, Finnic guides chanting river charms, and a Greek-speaking envoy who promises he can talk you through the imperial customs maze, provided you protect him from Pecheneg horse archers. The Dnieper Rapids test every oath. 9 times the river splinters around granite teeth, and 9 times you must unload cargo, drag hulls on greased logs, and fend off arrows hissed from reed beds. At the worst choke point, a boulder the size of a church altar rips the bottom from a canoe, drowning 2 of your youngest oarsmen. You pour ale into the current for their journey to the next world, and press on, hearts heavier, grips tighter on spear shafts. Grief, you remind your company, is a due. Every traveler pays the river. The only choice is whether you stop at the toll booth. When the estuary finally widens into the Black Sea's glassy expanse, your men half believe they have sailed off the edge of the earth. Days later, Constantinople's triple walls rise on the horizon, and awe swallows fatigue. Sunlight glints off tiled roofs, gilded domes, and warships chained across the harbor like guarding serpents. At the customs quay, imperial clerks count heads, weapons, and origins. They stamp each passport scroll with an inked image of an open hand, signifying recruits for the famed Varangian Guard, and escort you through echoing corridors where mosaics shimmer with lapis blues and molten gold. Oath Day comes in the basilica's shadow. You stand bareheaded while a chaplain intones Greek syllables that few in your company understand. then drives a candle flame across each blade to symbolize purification in holy fire. A pouch of solidi, bright discs stamped with Christ Pantocrator, clinks into your palm. Service has begun. The emperor himself appears, taller than rumor, wrapped in silks whose weave alone could ransom a farm. He speaks through an interpreter, praising northern valor and warning that desertion earns a branded forehead and an amputated hand. You find the threat almost redundant. Gold this weighty feels chain enough. Months turn into years. You drill in full armor under Anatolia's blistering sun, learning shield wall tactics designed for palace corridors rather than sea spray. Your axe gains a new edge pattern favored by Byzantine smiths, heavier at the toe for chopping through lamellar. Campaigns follow, first against Bulgarian rebels in fog-wet valleys, then escort duty for grain convoys bound for Antioch. In skirmish after skirmish, the Varangians hold the line while native regiments falter. Your reputation swells. So does that of a towering Norwegian called Harold, barely 20, but already aflame with ambition. He asks endless questions about Western kingdoms, tax systems, fortress designs, royal succession crises. You recognize in him the same horizon itch that once drove you toward Iceland, and you suspect his drive will end either on a throne or a pyre. Court life dazzles even a hardened trader. One Easter, you guard the emperor's silver throne. While Greek priests chant beneath chandeliers, dripping beeswax tears, perfume thickens the air. Eunuchs glide like ghosts bearing scrolls that map a world wider than any saga. Yet for all the splendor, politics here drip poison. Factions plot in whispering cloisters, and every jeweled smile hides a ledger of favors owed. You learn to keep your helmet plume low and your promises lower. When word arrives that the emperor's nephew has been blinded for treason, you feel the palace's marble floors shiver under unspoken fear. 5 years into service, you calculate that your share of loot and stipend equals the dowry of a minor princess back home. Some Varangians retire then, investing in estates along the Black Sea or riverfront mansions in Novgorod. Not you. Restlessness returns, pricking like sand beneath a wool cloak. The empire's grandeur feels increasingly like a fortress turned inward. Its gates may open to trade, but its culture walls in the mind. You miss mist, pine, and the roar of surf under a keel light enough to beach anywhere courage demands. Opportunity arrives cloaked in chaos. Word spreads that the emperor plans to depose a rebel prince across the Adriatic. Harold, now a captain, petitions to lead the Varangian detachment. He wants veterans who know both sea and river war, men like you. The campaign promises bonuses in Venetian coin, and more importantly, a sanctioned path back toward northern waters. You sign the muster roll. The Adriatic expedition blurs into a tapestry of siege engines, bribed city governors, and night assaults across marble quays. Harold excels, negotiating ransoms one day, storming ramparts the next. Reward chests overflow. His personal coffer swells until he must hire scribes to track its contents. Yet behind his calm eyes, you detect plotting. Each victory adds luster to a future claim back in Norway, where succession after Olaf's martyrdom remains anything but settled. You realize you march beside a man who views empires not as employers but as stepping stones. When peace finally settles over the Adriatic, Harold resigns his commission under imperial blessing, an honor rarely granted. You follow, sailing north with holds stuffed in equal parts with gold and ambition. In Kiev, Harold marries the Princess Elisiv, securing political legitimacy. Then the fleet strikes upstream, hauling over rapids with twice the discipline you once coaxed from novices. By the time you reach the Baltic, word of Harold's exploits races ahead like wildfire across stubble. Norwegian nobles whisper that a living thunderbolt approaches, flanked by Varangian veterans hardened in Byzantine crucibles. The campaign for Norway is swift and brutal. Harold buys some jarls, breaks others, and absorbs the rest into a kingdom suddenly unified with terrifying efficiency. You serve as marshal of his household guard, surprised to find yourself defending a crown after decades spent sidestepping them. But loyalty is a sliding scale. Harold rewards service with wide tracts of forested land and an exemption from most taxes, perks the earlier kings never offered. Unity, he argues, demands winners. Peace lasts scarcely a winter before ambition glares west again. England lies in turmoil. King Edward has died without an heir, and rival claims snarl the island like fishing nets. Harold convinces your war council that destiny calls across the North Sea. You board dragon-proud longships heavier than any you once steered, laden with horses for rapid inland thrusts. Landfall at the Humber estuary feels almost nostalgic, until English feared levies converge faster than scouts predicted. At Fulford Gate, you smash one army, but victory breeds overreach. A forced march to Stamford Bridge ends in a dawn mist pierced by arrow flights and grim English determination. Caught without armor, you fight half-naked, wielding axes overhead while arrows thrum like angry hornets. Harold falls to a shaft through the throat. His dream of twin crowns bleeds into Yorkshire soil. You survive, shield fractured, leg gashed, spirit cracked. As the remnant fleet limps back to Norway, news arrives that a Norman duke has crossed the channel and seized a battle destiny meant for Harold. The age of Viking ascendancy buckles under fortress walls, standing armies, and cross-channel kingdoms welded by feudal law. Raids will continue, but the tide that once carried clinker hulls from Lindisfarne to Baghdad has begun to ebb. Years later, you settle on a forest estate granted by Harold, now held in trust by his heirs. Children play near a stone church your silver helped endow. Its bell tolls canonical hours learned from Byzantium. At night you sit by a hearth of carved soapstone, shipped from Greenland, and polish an axe blade inlaid with gold leaf gifted by a Byzantine general. Each glint recalls a different horizon. Trousseau's lawless markets, Constantinople's jeweled shadows, Stamford Bridge's fatal dawn. You realize your life has braided together. Trade, faith, kingship, and mercenary daring into a single saga no skald could fully untangle. Sometimes a traveling monk asks you to recount your adventures so he can ink them onto parchment. You oblige but warn him that no map can capture the sea's restlessness or a wanderer's shifting loyalties. Kingdoms rise, emperors fall, but the urge to test the edge of what seems possible remains undefeated. You close your eyes, hearing again the first recruiter's promise beside the Black Sea Key. Gold for your axe, glory for your name. You earned both, yet neither weighs as much in memory as the moment before every voyage, when the wind filled the sail and the world opened wider than any oath could bind. You sit on the porch beam of your timber hall, the autumn air sharp with peat smoke and the tang of fermenting apples. A rooster crows somewhere beyond the birch grove, but the homestead feels strangely quiet. The younger warriors have ridden east with a merchant caravan, and the thralls are still in the sheds sorting wool. With nothing demanding your hands, memories drift in, bright as torchlight, dark as cellar shadow, about the one commodity tighter than any ship's rivet. Silver. You trace the rim of a worn Solidus with your thumb, And remember when coins weren't stamped with pastel-faced kings, but with curling Arabic script that looked like waves on a still pond. Those dirhams once poured north along every river you sailed, turning ambitions into armies and strangers into property. You first glimpsed the flow of Eastern silver on a muddy beach outside Ladoga. Traders unloaded leather sacks so heavy 2 men staggered. When split, the leather spilled shimmering discs across pine planks like a frozen waterfall. Each coin carried a date and a prayer in Kufic letters, proof they began life beneath sun-bleached caliphate domes before glinting beneath taiga spruce. The exchange rate set the tone of entire seasons. A dirham could buy a cow in the north, or 2 children farther inland, where famine bit harder than steel. You recall the sick, excited tumble in your gut the first time you bartered for human cargo, how quickly conscience muffled itself under the clink of minted silver. The logic felt simple then. Raids funded by coin demanded fresh coin to continue. Fortresses rising in Denmark, perfect circles of tamped earth, weren't built on heroism alone. They required imported iron, brick masons, and mercenaries who wouldn't lift a finger without pay, weighed out on a balance beam. You sailed those same rivers time after time, exchanging Baltic amber and walrus ivory for dirhams, then spending half your haul on Slav captives sold to Khazar brokers who paid in yet more silver. The people you herded onto deck were sons and daughters of woodcutters, honey collectors, and petty nobles, anyone unlucky enough to live near a portage wide enough for a Northman to drag a keel across. Years later, wearing a Varangian cloak in Constantinople, you watched accountants melt those same dirhams into Byzantine ingots to bankroll campaigns against Bulgars. The empire's alchemy fascinated you. Silver flowed in, troops flowed out, borders flexed, and nothing seemed to change except the scale of appetite. On parade days, you'd spot Slavic servants in palace kitchens, children now speaking Greek, chopping dates for pastries they'd never tasted at home. Freedom for one realm, bondage for another. The scales never settled. Back on your estate, a thrall approaches, hands stained from tanning vats, and asks permission to marry a fellow captive from the east. You grant it automatically. Marriage among thralls spreads responsibility and tempers escape risk. But later, the request gnaws at you. Somewhere along a river bend, a mother wonders why a son never returned with spring floods, why wolves howl so near the village when night comes. You have become the missing piece in her story, a shadow she curses without name. The realization weighs heavier than any coin. Still, commerce doesn't pause for reflection. This very week, a trader from Hedeby arrived with news that dirham supplies have thinned. Rumor blames political turmoil on the southern steppes, caravans lost to rival khans, maybe even a shift in trade winds along the Caspian. Whatever the cause, silver's scarcity drives prices sky high. One walrus tusk now buys triple its old weight. Local jarls celebrate. Ivory is plentiful along Greenland's hunting banks, but deeper currents worry you. When coin dries up, men seek profit in flesh and iron again. Slave raids you helped normalize may surge like a plague after mild winter. You decide to ride east with the next caravan, half as trader, half as observer. The journey revisits river routes etched into your memory. Oak-bordered Volkhov, reed-fringed Dnieper, wide mud flats that once sang beneath your oar. Rivers feel narrower than you remember. Perhaps your sense of proportion changed standing under Byzantine domes. Yet tension at portage sites remains identical. Every clan along the banks positions spearmen near landing stages, suspicious of strangers who might steal daughters or seize cattle. Trade and terror still share a skin. In Kiev's smoky marketplaces, dirham's scarcity is blatant. Coin cutters sit idle. Instead, merchants weigh silver bracelets hacked from older hoards. Debasement sneaks in. Some bracelets hide copper cores beneath thin plating. Disputes erupt. Knives flash, and everybody curses the missing Arabian caravans. You trade your reserve of Greenland tusks for furs and a handful of intact dirhams, then slip into alleys where slaves stand shackled beneath crude wattled awnings. A boy no older than 12 meets your gaze, eyes hardened past his years. He reminds you of the drowned oarsman at the Dnieper Rapids, the weight of youth swallowed by ambition. You walk on, pockets heavier, but spirit dimmed. South of Kiev, Pecheneg riders circle the steppes like hungry gulls. They ambush at dawn, arrows peppering your mule cart's wicker shields. You and your escort form a ring, shields braced, while Slavic merchants cower. During the melee, a bartering thought flickers. Each enemy corpse could translate into ransom or replacement thralls if captured alive. You hack it down as you swing your axe. The calculation sickens you. Victory comes, but at dusk, you bury 2 of your own under pine branches. Payment for silver you're no longer sure you value. On the return leg, you detour through Novgorod's Vetch Hall, intending to petition for regional toll relief. The assembly has its own worries. Shortfall in dirhams undermines civic projects. Wooden bridge repairs stall. Defensive palisades rot. They debate minting their own coinage stamped with a double-headed axe. Some elders argue independent currency breeds confident trade. Others fear it will invite royal Danish intervention. You add your voice, warning that dependency on far-flung silver makes every drought in Central Asia ripple north like famine. Balance, you urge, must arise from local resources: flax, iron bog ore, even taxed whale oil. So rivers become arteries again, not leashes. Back at the estate, thrall weddings proceed beneath early snow flurries. You gift the couple 2 small dirhams saved from your youth, not as currency, but as heirlooms of warning. Their children may never know the language etched around each coin's edge, yet the lesson needn't be readable to resonate. Value travels, power shifts, but choices cut deepest. Later, alone by hearthlight, you string a handful of remaining dirhams onto an iron wire, fashioning a wind chime. Each gust sets them ringing a melody both foreign and familiar. The song reminds you that silver once bought you armor, bought you men, bought you moments of immortality, but could never buy absolution. You draft a charter freeing any thrall who can present 2 witnesses to upright conduct for 7 consecutive winters. Some neighbors will call the policy reckless. They rely on bound labor to expand barley plots. You see it differently. A future built solely on captive backs will collapse when those backs break or disappear. Liberty seeded in measured doses may forestall revolt, and even birth loyalty stronger than chains. You nail the parchment near the mead hall door, an open challenge to custom. Months pass, and the first thrall meets the charter's terms, the tanner with stained hands. You grant him a strip of riverside land and a small herd of sheep. As ground thaws, he builds a turf-roofed hut and plants flax for linen. Watching his children splash in the shallows, you recall warehouses in Trousseau where thralls were itemized like ship's nails. One life inverted feels insignificant against the weight of those ledgers, yet the small victory sings louder than your chiming dirhams. Spring markets resume, and caravans still thirst for ivory, honey, and furs. Yet you notice more local traders carrying hack silver jewelry instead of minted dirhams, proof that northern economies are bending away from distant deserts. You join the trend, melting a portion of your hoard into spiral bracelets stamped with your hall's emblem, a pine tree pierced by an axe. The emblem tells buyers the silver's origin is honest, untethered to stolen altar plate or captured children. Whether they care is another matter, but the mark brands your intent. Sitting again on the porch beam, you feel the wind shift. Horses neigh. Geese wheel overhead on their own endless migration. You run a finger across an old dirham, its script nearly rubbed smooth, and sense a closing loop. Coin once flowed north like unstoppable tide. Now breakers retreat, leaving silt, wreckage, and opportunity for new ways of accounting value. You will not see those systems mature, but seeds sprout even from battlefield soil. Your saga once wove silver and slaves into every triumph. Now, on this quiet evening, you choose to sow a different thread, one that reckons value not by weight, but by worth. Somewhere downriver, a chime rings in the wind, and a freed family dreams under a roof they can truly call their own. A raw north wind scrapes across the ridgeline as you follow a pair of field workers toward a newly opened trench. They found bones yesterday, too many for a family burial, too orderly for the chaos of a plague pit. At first light, you volunteered to help catalog the site, curious whether the soil might whisper stories older than your household charters, stories etched in broken steel and shattered skulls. You left your estate at dawn, the freed tanner watching as you saddled a pony and promised to return before the moon's third rise. He waved, unsure why his lord felt compelled to dig among ghosts. You could not explain that emancipation and violence are ropes plaited from the same hemp. To unknot one, you must confront the other. The trench lies within a bend of river, not far from the king's new church foundation. When the spades first hit resistance beneath the loam, the workers assumed they'd struck a glacial boulder. Then the stone rolled, revealing an eye socket wide as a coin and a jaw clamped on nothing but dirt. Now canvas tarps flap in the breeze, shading forms that once breathed. You kneel beside a thigh bone pierced clean through, the iron arrowhead still lodged inside like a dark thorn. Its shape is Anglo-Saxon, triangular, barbs broken on impact. You brush away soil with a horsehair whisk, noticing the fracture pattern, evidence of force from behind. Whoever fired that arrow shot a fleeing man in the back. A scholar from the cathedral arrives with wax tablets and goosequill pens. He speaks Latin first, then shifts to your tongue when you scowl. Age lines his face, but his hands shake from something deeper than chill, excitement tempered by dread. He reads bone as you once read river currents. Together, you map the trench. 28 bodies laid side by side, ankles bound with hemp cord, skulls cleaved by edge weapons. Some victims bear filed teeth, an affectation of certain warrior cults. Others wear fragments of Christian rosaries around snapped necks. Hacked vertebrae testify to systematic beheading. You catalog blade marks, arrowheads, and hastily forged shackles. Violence, you realize, leaves a signature no royal scribe can amend. As the sun climbs, you step back and picture the scene centuries earlier. Late autumn, perhaps, frost silvering grass, an English militia driving shackled captives toward a shallow pit, while priests chant litanies against heathen threats. Or maybe Northmen performed the slaughter, purging spies before a winter retreat. The trench refuses allegiance. It only records outcome. You feel a chill unrelated to wind. This could be the fate of any band that misjudged timing, outpaced reinforcements, or gambled on mercy that never arrived. After midday meal, flatbread and hard cheese, you walk to a second excavation 50 paces upstream. Here, archaeologists pry open a burial mound believed to date from the Great Heathen Army's winter camp, the one Saga's place in Mercia generations ago. Under sodden timbers rest skeletons arranged in a radial design around a boat keel, as though still rowing toward some otherworld port. Unlike the pit victims, these dead wear riches: silver-inlaid spearheads, tortoise brooches, a sword pommel encrusted with garnet. Yet their bones also tell of brutality: healed sword cuts on ribs, craniums deformed by repeated blows, one femur fused crooked after an arrow shattered it mid-charge. Survival had no gentler hand for victors than for vanquished. Kneeling beside a young woman's remains, identified by pelvic tilt, not by ornaments, you note the wedge-shaped gap where her front teeth were removed, perhaps for aesthetic filing, perhaps knocked out in interrogation. Her wrists show grooves from rope. You imagine her captured, enslaved, and transported across the North Sea, only to die during the same campaign that fed your homeland's war coffers with silver. She is the human margin note beneath the trade ledgers you once balanced on a longship deck. No dirham, no law code, no liberation charter can retroactively lift her shackles. Evening slides in, turning river water from blue to pewter. The scholar packs tablets scribbled with measurements, while diggers cover bones with linen. You volunteer to stand final watch, partly to lend muscle, mostly to wrestle with the unease coiling inside your chest. As shadows pool, you listen to reeds hiss, a sound like whispered confession. Freedom for your thralls feels noble, progressive even, but the trench reminds you that violence underwrote every coin that purchased their chains in the first place. Liberation is a starting point, not a ledger balance settled. A distant wolf howl shatters the hush. Instinctively, you reach for the axe at your belt, not the ornate Byzantine blade, but a workman's tool, its edge sharp from chopping firewood. You feel the familiar weight and realize a truth the bones have been teaching all day. Civilization is only a sheath. Remove it, and steel cuts as keenly now as when skulls cracked beside this river. You recall Harold's fall at Stamford Bridge, the way ambition sliced open thousands of souls to write another page in some royal chronicle. Empires may trade swords for statutes, but statutes still rely on force applied by men with swords. At dawn, mist curls off the water. The dig leader returns with a local priest who sprinkles holy water over the trench, murmuring prayers for souls long judged. You watch, unsure whether the gesture sanctifies history or smothers it. The cleric finishes, then thanks you for your vigil, inviting you to Sunday Mass. You nod non-committally. Faith comforts, but understanding demands more than ritual. You need these bones to speak plainly. Before departing, you carve a small stake and drive it at the mass grave's edge. Upon it, you hang a single dirham, hole punched through, threaded by hemp twine. The coin spins in the breeze, flashing sunlit arcs toward sky, then darkening as it turns inward, like memory itself. You intend the gesture as acknowledgement. Silver fueled the blade that spilled this blood. Let silver now mark the place where memory must outlast coinage. The scholar asks what the token means. You answer, interest paid on an old debt. Back at your hall, you convene the household. Freedmen and bonded alike gather on benches. Torso, curious why their lord smells of grave soil. You recount the trench, sparing no detail. Gasps ripple. One thrall covers her mouth. Then you announce a new decree. Any future expedition under your banner must dedicate a tithe, 10% of profit, to safe burials for both crew and captives, enemies and allies. Some gape. Puzzled. Burial rites cost silver better spent on sales or seed grain. You insist. A land that forgets its corpses courts ghosts. Winter closes fists around the valley. Under lamplight, you correspond with the cathedral scholar. arranging for a stone marker at the trench site, inscribed in Latin and Old Norse. Here lie the fallen, named and unnamed, whom war and wanderlust entwined. You fund the stone from proceeds of last season's wool, not from hidden hoards. Each dinar earned by honest toil feels lighter in the purse and brighter in the conscience than a sack of looted chalices ever did. As snow falls, you sense your saga turning inward. Exploration once meant measuring horizons. Now it means excavating the cost those horizons demanded. You spend evenings teaching children, your own and freed families, to read runes and Latin both, so memory cannot be lost in translation. You keep the dirham chime hanging by the door, its song muted by snowdrifts, but still audible on nights when wind mimics arrow flight. Sometimes you think you hear voices in its ringing, river ghosts, trench dead, the healed but haunted survivors of ancient slaughters. They do not accuse, they remind. One thawing afternoon, the tanner turned freeholder visits with linen woven from his first flax harvest. He offers the cloth as tribute. You decline payment, instead proposing it serve as shroud cloth for any traveler who dies without kin nearby. He smiles, a slow, relieved curve, as though realizing that freedom's fullest expression is the choice to give. In spring, you will ride south to oversee the gravestone's placement. For now, you stand beside the porch beam, watching snowmelt carve channels through the yard. Water finds memory, just as rivers once guided your prow. Bones resurface, stories demand telling. You tighten your cloak and vow that when history unearths your generation, excavators will find not mass pits, but markers of reckoning, evidence that somewhere between raid and realm, a people learned to honor both life taken and life redeemed. You ride west at midsummer, hooves drumming damp turf as purple foxglove sways along the forest verge. Fresh from those days cataloging the execution pit, you carry questions knotted tighter than saddle cinches. Where does violence end and devotion begin? A wandering skald once sang that swords feed the earth the way blood feeds the gods. You intend to test the verse against soil and bone. Word has reached your hall of a peat bog where bodies emerge intact beneath blankets of sphagnum moss. Eyes still closed, hair still braided, throats neatly slit as though by ritual design. If murder pits display war's aftermath, perhaps these marsh altars reveal what war tried to appease. The journey takes 3 days. On the 4th dawn, thick mist floats across a mirror-still marsh, broken by tufts of cotton grass. A local peat cutter guides you to a sunken hollow rimmed with alder roots. He speaks in hushed tones, explaining how his spade sliced into something soft, yet resisting like cured hide. He thought it a drowned calf until he saw fingernails. Now a dark shape rests on a plank sled, limbs folded in fetal peace, skin stained the color of oiled oak. A leather cord still loops the neck, knot pulled so tight the flesh beneath is pinched like the mouth of a money pouch. No weapon mark mars the torso. The death blow was precise, intentional, almost careful. You kneel close enough to smell peat and iron. Cold dread and reverence mingle. This was no battlefield casualty. This was an offering. You help the cutter haul the body to drier ground, noting every detail for the cathedral scholar who will surely follow. Shaved head except for a nape braid, nails manicured. Last meal of barley and mistletoe seed still lodged between molars. A sacrifice prepared, not a criminal condemned. You've heard priests call such rites barbaric, yet as your fingers brush the cord, you recall how your own people smear blood on keel stems before a voyage, trusting crimson to soften unseen currents. In desperate seasons, boundaries blur between prayer and violence. Leaving the bog, you cross heathland toward a timber palisade rumored to guard an even older rite, the great midwinter feast where animals and sometimes people were hanged from oak boughs as gifts to Odin. The fort's earthwork forms a perfect ring, like Harold's fortress scaled down for theology. Inside, archaeologists chip away at post holes that once anchored gallows beams. Pig bones mingle with spear-pierced dogs, and in one corner, two juvenile skeletons lie opposite each other, dagger nicks along their ribs. Charcoal lines suggest a platform burned afterward, sealing smoke and soul together. You stand silent, hearing echoes of drums and chanting that once filled this courtyard, pulses of fear and wonder fused. A young cleric observing the dig shifts uneasily when you voice admiration for the craftsmanship of ritual. He insists salvation requires no slaughter, then falters at the sight of a gilded crucifix worn beside a skeleton within a shallow pit. Proof that even converts hedged bets when famine loomed. You remind him Scripture speaks of a single sacrifice redeeming many. Perhaps these ancestors sought a similar logic, multiplied across seasons and spirits. He frowns, but later confesses that while copying psalms, he sometimes imagines lambs bleating on Jerusalem altars. Humanity, you both know, shares metaphors more than dogma. Night finds you at a longhouse north of the fort, guest of a farmer whose granary walls display painted scenes of Thor's hammer and Christ's fish overlapping in swirling vines. Over ale, he recounts a recent dream. A pale girl rising from a lake, handing him a clay vessel brimming with blood that shimmered like starlight. She urged him to pour it on newly sown barley, or the crop would fail. He woke terrified, yet strangely heartened, for the dream promised agency in the face of weather's whims. You listen, seeing how personal visions braid into communal rites. In another century, the church may reinterpret his dream as saintly prophecy, yet the action, blood for bread, remains constant. At dawn, fog lifts to reveal distant standing stones encircling a grassy knoll. You ride there alone. The stones bear shallow cup marks filled with rainwater, each indentation aligning with sunrise on equinox. Some hold tiny shards of bone and rust flakes from knives long dissolved. You remember forging new burial laws to honor warm dead. These stones stand as older legislation, written in granite, legislating cosmic balance through sacrifice. Touching the weathered cups, you feel pulse beats of generations who poured out first fruits, and, when harvests failed, perhaps poured out something warmer. The ride home is autumnal, despite the calendar's claim to midsummer. Leaves rustle like secret tongues, and each river crossing mirrors clouds the color of raw wool. You carry no relics, only impressions, yet they weigh heavily. At your hall, freed tenants gather for harvest planning. They speak of compost ratios, irrigation ditches, and seed varieties robust enough to outsmart early frost. Their pragmatic vigor heartens you, but you also sense an unspoken yearning for ritual assurance. Practical fixes mend fields, yet hearts still whisper toward mysteries. After supper, you convene the household beneath torches. Children sit cross-legged, entranced. Warriors lean on spear shafts. Thralls, now freed or soon to be, crowd near doorways. You recount the bog body, the gallows posts, the dreaming farmer. Then you propose a rite neither church nor old gods dictate. At each solstice, the community will gather by the river trench marker to pour libations of mead and scatter the season's best grain. No blood, only gift and gratitude. The gesture, you explain, honors those who died to secure cycles we now enjoy while acknowledging the land's fragility. Some nod eagerly, others hesitate, wary of pagan echoes. You address the fear directly, Intention consecrates action. A heart-seeking harmony taints no grain, offends no heaven. Winter approaches swift as a hawk. On a frost-brittle morning, you heft a bucket of mead infused with honey from your own hives and led neighbors to the trench. Snow crunches under fur-lined boots. At the grave's edge, wind whistles through bare birch branches, a thin hymn. You pour amber liquid onto frozen earth. Steam rises like a blessing. Children follow, scattering handfuls of barley, each kernel a wish for tomorrow. No drums, no chords at throats, yet the moment pulses with the same ancient tremor you felt beside the bog offering. You catch the eye of the cathedral scholar standing apart, quill in mittened hand. He sketches, but when the ceremony ends, he steps forward, sprinkles holy water, and recites a prayer some call Christian, others call universal. That night, candlelight flickers over carved rafters. You hang a new wind chime beside the Durham chain, this one forged from humble iron pieces gifted by neighbors who lacked silver. Its tone is lower, earthier. Together, the chimes weave a contrapuntal melody, bright tings of commerce, dusky clangs of common labor. They remind you that sacrifice has shifted from bodies to choices, choosing to share grain, free workers, mark graves, and remember river ghosts. Violence will never vanish. Axes remain sharp. But each deliberate offering of peace, however small, steals ground from the hunger that once demanded throats for plowing seasons. You drift to sleep wondering how future archaeologists will read your era. Will they find markers instead of pits, chimes instead of chords? Will they see a people who learned that the gods, whether old or new, value intent over blood? Perhaps they'll unearth this very hall, trace soot layers on roof beams, and deduce solstice fires lit for gratitude rather than fear. If so, let them know a restless sailor, once baptized in coin and conquest, tried to reforge sacrifice into stewardship. The hearth fades, embers glow like distant runestones, and outside, two chimes, silver and iron, answer the wind together. You wake to the hush that follows a heavy snowfall, the world outside your hall muted under a quilt of white. Last night's twin chimes still echo faint in your ears, silver and iron singing together. And in that lingering harmony, you sense a turning of the age itself. The children who scattered grain at the trench marker now sleep in lofts warmed by glazed windows, not smoke-hole rafters. Their lullabies mix fragments of skaldic verses with Latin hymns. The two songs no longer war inside their throats. They glide side by side like twin currents joining a single river. You realize dawn has come for more than a day. An era tilts toward something neither fully old nor purely new. Stepping outside, you survey the valley. Snow smooths plow lines into soft curves, but you know every furrow bends with intent. Freed tenants arranged them in careful grids, applying lessons traded from Frankish monasteries, where monks turned geometry into agriculture centuries ago. Your people once raided those cloisters. Now they write to abbots for advice on crop rotation. The fields look dormant, yet seeds sleep under the crust, ready to burst come thaw. Beneath stillness, momentum hums. Down by the river, fishermen test an ice hole with iron hooks, muttering about a colder pattern creeping across winters. Elders whisper that summers shorten, glaciers inch forward in distant fjords, and harvest moons rise earlier, stingier. Climate itself becomes a rival chieftain, demanding tribute. You recall sagas of Fimbulwinter, 3 seasons of killer's cold, and wonder if myth merely forecasts memory. Yet instead of sharpening spears, the villagers fit thicker thatch, stock deeper granaries, Brew stronger ale fortified with imported hops. Adaptation replaces alarm. After breakfast, you ride to the newly completed stone church. Its bell tower, a finger of quarried granite pointing at a sky bruised with storm. Masons from Normandy cut the blocks. Local timber crews raised the scaffold. Your own purse underwrote half the cost. On consecration day, the bishop sprinkled holy oil across threshold and altar, but he also invited you to carve a dragon motif into the door lintel for cultural continuity. You did so with steady hands, watching the crowd's expressions shift from suspicion to subtle pride. Once such imagery would have been smashed as pagan. Now, it stands sanctioned, a negotiated peace between memory and orthodoxy. Inside, light slants through stained glass shipped from Rhine workshops, illuminating a congregation unlike any you saw in your raiding years. Slavic beadworkers kneel beside Saxon blacksmiths. Greenlanders in sealskin cloaks share pews with Irish scribes. The priest delivers homily in 2 tongues, ending with a blessing adapted from local rune charms, an invocation for safe seas, fertile fields, and sturdy roof beams. Doctrine bends without breaking, shaped by the same practicality that once bent oak planks into wave-cutting hulls. Leaving the church, you pass the tanner's eldest, now a free citizen apprenticed to a scribe. He carries a stack of parchment chronicles, records of birth and land transfer, marriages and manumissions. Written law replaces oral oath. You smile at the irony. Long ago, you trusted nothing but spoken honor sealed by ale. Yet paper's permanence seduces even skeptics. Its lines promise justice can outlive memory's fragility. Afternoon light finds you at the hilltop where the old god pole used to stand. Only a weathered stump remains, but you plant a young birch beside it every spring. Today, saplings crowd the slope, their white bark catching sun like polished bone. Forest is reclaiming sacred ground, nature softening edges of once bloody ritual. Children will one day mistake this grove for nothing more than a pleasant picnic spot, unaware it was once an altar of fear and wonder. The thought pleases you. Legacy should be compost, nourishing new stories. As dusk bleeds indigo, messengers arrive from the coast with news that merchants in distant Bruges crave walrus ivory and stockfish more than ever. But European kings now restrict private warbans on trade routes. Escort licenses, church tithes, port tariffs. Regulation encircles profit. A younger you would have cursed bureaucracy. The older you weighs opportunity. Stability lowers risk, broadens markets, and turns pillagers into partners. You draft a charter for a merchant guild, open to any crew that swears to the valley's burial covenant and shares 10% of profits with communal coffers. The guild will buy weatherstone for road paving, fund a school where runes and Latin share the same wax tablets, and maintain winter relief bins of grain. Some captains grumble, but most sign. Predictable dues beat unpredictable blades. Night deepens. Snowflakes swirl like drifting ash around the porch where twin chimes ring. You hold a cup of mulled cider and recall every keel you launched. From the clinker-built funeral craft that burned on Lake Mälaren, through the river skiffs that skimmed silent as otters passed Slavic villages, to the broad-beamed cargo ships that ferried Harold's doomed army. Each hull carried ambition greater than its timbers. Yet wood rots, sails tear, steel dulls. What lingers are habits. Adapt to weather, honor the craft, share the haul, remember the dead. Those habits now inform council meetings instead of war bands, field rotations instead of fortresses. A final image flickers, the peat-preserved woman with the cord at her throat, her sacrifice meant to turn God's faces toward anxious farmers. You understand her differently now. She was currency in a desperate economy of meaning. Today, your people spend grain libations, oath rings of hack silver, and communal labor instead. The medium changes, the message endures. Humans will bargain with uncertainty, seeking semblance of control. The trick is steering the bargain toward life rather than loss. You sip cider and listen. The silver dirham chime pings sharply. Ghost of commerce survived from desert mints to northern winds. The iron chime answers, lower and steadier, song of soil, tools, and hands that choose to build. Their converging tones echo across the dark, promising that tomorrow's dawn will find the valley busy with hammers, prayers, laughter, maybe even argument. Evidence that a culture born in storm learned to live with weather rather than against it. One by one, windows wink out as neighbors bank fires. You linger, watching breath cloud before your face, until only the chimes keep company with the stars. Finally, you step inside, slide the bar across the oak door, and feel the glow of hearthstone tempered by drifting embers. The age of wave-borne thunder has ebbed, but its restless spirit survives in curiosity, in blended traditions, in a willingness to reshape tools once forged for conquest into instruments of community. Tomorrow, you will oversee guild contracts, review school timber, perhaps settle a land dispute with quill instead of spear. Yet before sleep, you whisper an old blessing taught by a Varangian chaplain. May the course be true, the cargo just, the port kind. It fits this inland life as well as it once fit a Black Sea galley. You close your eyes knowing chime music will greet the next traveler, be he merchant, pilgrim, or curious child, and tell him, in languages blended by time, that here on this river, bend a people chose to anchor hope instead of hunger. Thanks for sharing this quiet voyage through Viking memory with me. If you're still awake, drift down below and tell us what hour your clock reads now and which image from the saga rocked you toward sleep. Your comments help us steer future journeys that hum like longships over glassy water. Let the glow of the screen fade, feel the hush of snow over Icelandic fields, and breathe in the slow rhythm of oars on a silver river. Close your eyes, traveler. Tomorrow's horizon will wait. Good night, and may your dreams ride calm seas until dawn light finds you rested.